This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, back from Orlando. We'll get details on that. Some real clear look by Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney at the preparations in Florida for this terrible storm coming. Rob Carolyn with us in 15 minutes. A great day ahead for us. 3 strong hours. Gina Martin Adams on the equity markets.
Good.
Yeah, and earnings begin Friday with James Dimon.
We had Jamie Dimon yesterday with Lisa Abramowitz. Fascinating discussion here. But yeah, they're going to kick off earnings, Tom. I'd like to hear what Jamie Dimon likes to say about this economy.
Kaylee Lyons into politics. I really want to quiz on the last 48 hours for the Vice President of the United States. That seems to be front and center. Wendy Schiller with us as well this morning. The market churning here before the economic data, before the inflation data, PPI, CPI, EIEIO, 42,000 on the Dow was a close yesterday. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. We say good morning on your commute across America from Citi Field,
Wow.
Long Island,
Solid.
to Petco Park, San Diego. We say good morning.
Yep.
From the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash. No, it's not Lisa Mateo. It's Sean Tucker.
Oh, sorry.
He'll do.
Sorry. Antitrust enforcers, of course, weighing an historic breakup to mitigate Google's dominance in search. Shares of Google parent Alphabet down just about 1% pre-market, and that is also dragging the overall market down with it. S&P futures right now, well, down 2 points. Dow futures 22 points lower, and the Nasdaq futures 15 points lower. Minutes of the Fed's jumbo rate cut meeting being released today. They should show the downside risk policymakers thought warranted that 0.5% cut. Chinese stocks listed onshore suffering their biggest drop in more than 4 years. The CSI 300 index, that plunged 7.1%. As we look at yields right now, the 2-year unchanged, 3.95. The 10-year yield unchanged, 4.02%. Hurricane Milton, have to add this, adding further strain to the insurance market in Florida. After Helene, losses for private insurers estimated $3 to $6 billion. The average annual premium for homeowners insurance in Florida, by the way, has surged to about $11,000 a year, making it the highest in the nation. Florida also has seen significant number of insurance companies actually pull out of this state. So keeping an eye on that. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul, welcome back. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. One vignette of Orlando there where like the road's all jammed up. Could you get gasoline?
Yeah, you can see the I-4, people just kind of getting out of that whole part of the state, Tom.
Gasoline
trying to get
short.
Yep, exactly right. And they had plenty of warning here, and people are taking it seriously.
After the last one, you think so? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So. We came back to our hotel rooms yesterday during the morning. They'd taken all the furniture off of our little balconies in our hotel and put it in our room. And so they know what they're doing.
This isn't the Motel 6.
Exactly right.
It's like very good.
They know what they're doing down there.
Paul Sweeney with your update. We are honored to have Rob Carolyn as our Bloomberg meteorologist. Lack of hysteria. We'll go to him numerous times today. Right now, as we do in a great bull market, we go to Michael Purvis of Tallbacken, who synthesizes this together and beautifully works the Pacific Rim into the discussion as well. If we're in a bull market, what proof do you need to say it will continue?
Well, I think you always got check valuation, right? And the reality is that earnings growth, expected earnings growth, is still likely to be really pretty good. I'm not saying the S&P 500 or the Mag 6, Mag 7 are cheap, or for the matter of the SPX equal weight, but are they reasonable enough, and are we going to have macro risk environment that is going to reward risk-taking? And I would say the answer to that question is definitely yes.
What's the Purvis exuberance meter look like?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things right now is that for all of the fresh highs in the S&P 500 and some of the other indices, the VIX has been remarkably tense here, right? The volatility risk premium, that's the spread of the VIX to, say, in this case, 20-day realized volatility. Yesterday was over 11 points. That's sort of in the bottom decile go back as long as you want type of readings there. And to have that elevated volatility risk premium accompanied by very high put call skew, meaning the spread between put implied vol and call implied vol, which is basically, do our investors buying protection? All those things are saying yes, right? So if you avoid a left tail between now and the end of the year, I would suggest to you, Tom, that that only reinforces the ability for the market to power into fresh highs.
On the fixed income side, I have the smart people come in here and tell me, like Lisa Bromwitz, spreads are really tight here. Yeah. What's the fixed income market telling you here?
Well, that's one of the really fascinating things. You look at high yield spreads. That's something I've been very focused on, is that those have been grinding into lower levels almost every week now, right? So you have a very tense VIX, and then the high yield spreads are going lower, right? And just since the July peak, I think they've come in almost 100 basis points here. And they're, you pull out a long-term chart, they're very, very low levels here. So the high yield spreads are telling you that the economy is good. The VIX market is telling you that investors are buying protection, which is a sensible thing to do, with the market up 20% year to date. And of course, you've got geopolitics in the Middle East, and then of course you have an election less than a month away right now. So yeah, there is a I think look, I call it this dual Goldilocks situation where the Fed, it's not easing as much as I think some people think it is, but it is easing, right? It's not raising rates. It's in a more dovish stance, and you're doing that while you have incredibly strong jobs report, as we just got, and you have real wages climbing. And you could even call it triple stimulus, because now you have the Chinese stimulating here too, exactly. Reinvigorating a very important economy outside of the United States.
I've never heard that phrase, triple stimulus.
I like that.
That'll be on CFA level 4.
I like that. INGO, the Bloomberg Index browser, U.S. corporate high yield up 7.5%. That's the best performing place in fixed income. I like that.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised with, I guess, all the talk of maybe recession here, recession there. High yield's done so well.
High yield's done really well. Part of it, if you remember just from a year or two ago, there was this massive maturity wall issue there. And a lot of the companies have been very nimble players and pushing that wall out or diffusing it there. And a lot of the companies in that index are doing pretty well. Some of them are oil companies that are in a very different spot than, say, 2015 and 16 in terms of how they're engineering themselves. So look, I mean, but I think that's an important thing. It's also a statement that credit, which is usually among the more cynical group of investors, is sort of saying, you know what, we see pale green to bright green lights here going into 2025.
I want to dive back, and we can do this with you. I'm just trying to think which firm to dive back to before we go back a few years here with SG. Let's go back to SG Warburg. Why not?
I like that.
Okay.
Is the concentration of equities disturbing to you, or are we just reliving the 60s?
That's a really good question. I mean, look, I think there's no, in my mind, yes, you're talking about the Mag 6 and Mag 7, and I'm guessing whether you're going to see that lead again.
Well, Danoff's portfolio is up to 57% top 10 stocks.
Yeah.
Just as one example.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a lot of people that say will tell you that if you have a healthy, to have a healthy S&P 500, you've got to have more rotation. You've got to have all these other banks participate in it. I would say, I guess the question in my mind is that I don't think we've ever seen, Tom, certainly not in my lifetime, a group of stocks fundamentally perform as well. Yep. So if you look at the price earnings ratios for the Mag 6 and then for the SPX equal weight, which is a proxy for the 493, you'll see a pretty obvious spread there, of course. But when you look at it on a price earnings to growth ratio, the Mag 6 continue to be, well, that's growth adjusting, right? You're going to pay a higher PE for higher growth, but the growth is so much more higher and arguably, I think, more consistent, right? It's a higher quality growth than you see in some of the more economically sensitive stocks. So it's actually, in many measured that way, it's actually cheaper than the 493.
There we go. Selling the bull market. We got to leave it there because we got to go to the hurricane. Michael Purvis, thank you so much with Tallback. And right now with your news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Hurricane Milton is picking up speed in the Gulf of Mexico as Florida's west coast braces for the storm to make expected landfall tonight. The storm is expected to bring up to 15 feet of storm surge in some areas. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor telling residents time is running out to evacuate to safer ground.
If you're in a single-story house and we get a 15-foot surge, which means that water comes in immediately, there's nowhere to go. That home that you're in ultimately will be a coffin.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn will have more about Milton in a few moments. We're learning more about Bob Woodward's new book. War is set to be released next week. It's the Washington Post associate editor's fourth book since Donald Trump's upset victory in 2016. According to the book, Trump, while president, sent American-made coronavirus tests in 2020 to Russian President Vladimir Putin during a crippling shortage in the U.S. and around the world. Meanwhile, Trump is denying he's spoken several times to Putin since leaving the White House, as reported in the book. ABC's Jonathan Karl spoke to the former president by phone.
He said was that you've had a number of conversations with Putin. Is that true? I mean, I imagine that could be.
No?
That's
false.
Oh, really?
That's false.
So you haven't spoken to him since you left the White House?
No, I have not.
Woodward also says President Biden had profanity-laced outbursts about Putin and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in private. The FBI says it arrested an Afghan man who was plotting a terror attack in the U.S. on Election Day. He is accused of planning to kill Americans in the name of ISIS. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Here's my amateur weather guide take. I live to be the guy in the raincoat in the water.
Yeah,
what a song and dance.
I know.
Rob Carolyn joins us right now. Rob Carolyn, my amateur take is this thing's moving faster than you told us 24 hours ago.
That's right, Tom, and it's expected to continue picking up speed as it starts to get influenced by a weather system over the northern Gulf Coast. This is the system that's kind of turned the path from east-northeast to northeast. And this is also the system that hopefully is going to weaken Milton a little bit before it makes its way into Tampa Bay late tonight, say around midnight or so, as either a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane. Right now it's a Cat 5 with sustained winds of 160 miles an hour. It's less than 300 miles to the southwest of Tampa, moving northeast at 14 miles an hour. It's still a very compact hurricane, but as it weakens and moves northeast, that flow is expected to expand a bit, and the hurricane is forecast to be about twice the size than it currently is as it goes through west central Florida late tonight and during the day tomorrow.
Rob, I guess what I've heard some of the reporting about Tampa Bay is the concern about storm surge. Talk to us about that and what it means for our friends in Tampa.
So the really important thing is exactly where does the core of the eye cross? As I mentioned yesterday, if the eye crosses around St. Petersburg, it takes the storm surge and pushes it directly through the opening of Tampa Bay and right into the city. So that's the worst case scenario, seeing the core of the storm go right north of Tampa Bay. If the storm center passes south of Tampa, say around Bradenton, Anna Maria Island, Port Charlotte, then the storm surge is really bad there, but the winds will be offshore, and they'll actually push the water out of Tampa Bay, and the storm surge would not be bad in the city of Tampa. It would be bad there for the cities south of Tampa. They'd be looking at a 10 to 15-foot storm surge. So where that eye goes tonight is critical as to who is really going to see the maximum storm surge.
But, Rob, Asheville, North Carolina was devastated, almost biblically. When this thing hits land on the peninsula known as Florida, what happens to the East Coast?
Well, as it goes across the state tonight, Tom, the core is going to start to fall apart. So we'll be dealing with a Category 3 or 4 hurricane in Tampa, but by the time it's passing Orlando, it will have weakened to a Category 1. It will likely be a Category 1 tomorrow when it exits the state sometime late tomorrow morning, early in the afternoon, say around the New Smyrna area. But even there, they're going to be seeing some winds from Melbourne all the way up to Jacksonville and into southeastern Georgia, gusting over 75 miles an hour, which will be enough to produce a storm surge of about 3 to 8 feet on the northeastern side of the state tomorrow. So the problems are going to extend with this storm across the entire central and north-central part of Florida tonight and tomorrow.
The information you get from Rob Carolyn there, and a storm surge on the east side of Florida. Rob Carolyn, we'll hear more from you, I'm sure, in the next 24 hours. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning with futures flat, pretty much at -3. Bloomberg Surveillance were brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around the clock. If you are a certain persuasion, you remember where you were when you closed the book on the Winds of War by Herman Wouk, and you said, when's he going to write the next one, War and Remembrance? And you waited 2 years. Young James Stavridis had this feeling, as I did, like you waited, except Admiral Stavridis, of course, lived. The American military, the United States Navy of Pug Henry as well. The book is The Restless Wave. It is a novel idea, a novel from James Stavridis.
I'm 4 chapters in, but you took it off my desk. I'm ready to go to chapter 5.
And it's just wonderful about a young lad before 1941 across the arc of World War II. What's the why, Admiral Stavridis? Why did you need to write The Restless Wave?
Tom, I'll give you 3 reasons. I'll do them fast. One is Winston Churchill said, the further you want to look into the future, the more you have to look into the past, meaning the lessons of World War II are still with us. Great power of war in the Pacific, the rise of technologies, and then third and finally, and most importantly, you mentioned it, Tom, character. We think of Captain Pug Henry from The Winds of War. Here we have a young naval officer. He's flawed. He makes mistakes. He's in a love triangle. There's betrayal. It's the early days of the greatest generation. So 3 reasons to write a sweeping novel about the Second World War.
I'm going to give this away. Paul's 4 chapters into the book. Page 310. The XO took a breath. Admiral Wright failed us, sir. He was slow and hesitant. He doesn't understand the new technology. His battle plan looked like Dewey at Manila in the Spanish-American War. Admiral Stavridis, are we living that today with new drone technology and all? Does the Navy have to adapt and adjust?
100%, Tom. And look at Ukraine, where the Russian Black Sea Fleet has been sunk by the Ukrainians, except the Ukrainians don't even have a Navy. They're using drones, cruise missiles, exquisite intelligence, surface forces operating using artificial intelligence. Our Navy better learn those lessons and get ready. And that's something that we experienced at the start of World War II as well.
Admiral, Tom and I have a million questions on many different hot spots around the world. Let's start with the Middle East here. Can you give us your latest thinking on how things are developing there and how you kind of foresee, I guess, the next several weeks and months?
Clearly, the next big muscle movement is going to be an attack by Israel in retaliation, appropriately, for 200 ballistic missiles that came raining down on Israel 5-6 days ago. So what will that attack look like? I think that's the key question for investors. I think it's going to be big, but not shock and awe level kind of strikes. They'll probably go against the military-industrial complex in Iran, probably not against the nuclear power complex, and probably not against energy. So that should be something that investors can tolerate as we look at rising risk in the region. Bottom line, I think there's about a 1 in 4 chance of a broader war in the Middle East that drags the U.S. in. That's uncomfortably high, but I'd still bet against a big sweeping war in the Middle East. Let's hope not.
Admiral, to what extent is the U.S. policy being represented by the Israelis here? It seems like the relationship between Biden and Netanyahu is not maybe as strong as we would have hoped here. And we have, U.S. assets, men and women in the region there. So where are we in terms of dealing with the Israelis?
You are correct. We have 50,000 troops in and around the Middle East, many of them at sea on Navy warships, by the way, but many ashore as well. So it's critical that we maintain the strongest relationship with Israel, which is our best partner in the region. Unfortunately, at a personal level, it's pretty clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden have not good relations. And here's our hope. The next tier down, that's General Lloyd Austin working with his counterpart, Israeli Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. That's a pretty good relationship, but a storm cloud to watch, no pun intended, a terrible hurricane coming, but a storm cloud to watch is that Yoav Gallant, Minister of Defense, just canceled a meeting in the Pentagon. So relations are not good at the moment, U.S.-Israel.
James Stavridis, late in your book, Arleigh Burke shows up. No, folks, it's not the name of a boat. It's an actual person. And Arleigh Burke shows up to drive the story forward. And he says at one point, with some heat in his voice, the difference in an officer, good or bad, is about 10 seconds. There's an officer from the streets of Boston named John Kelly, who was the longest chief of staff the Marines served Donald Trump. And he's come out and he's made real clear he's not a fan of the operations of the former president. If we have elected President Trump, I mean, in 2016, this was all new. Will he be able, as commander-in-chief, to form a military apparatus after what we hear from the likes of John Kelly?
First of all, John Kelly is one of my closest friends. And I encourage everybody to listen, to read, to follow what John Kelly has said about attempting to take President Trump to a cemetery in the north of France. And according to John Kelly, President Trump described those buried there as suckers and losers. I think that is a disqualification to be a commander-in-chief. In terms of can he put together coherent national security for the nation, it depends on who he selects to bring in office alongside him. The quality people, General Jim Mattis, General John Kelly, General H.R. McMaster, they're not coming back. You don't have to get kicked by a mule a second time to understand whether that's a good thing to do or not. So if there is a second Trump presidency, we'll have to see who's willing to come in and who does come in.
Paul and I went to the Lawrenceville and Fairport War College, where we figured out the Germans had two fronts, the Eastern Front and the Western Front. Israel has 2, 3, 4 fronts right now, extending over to the Persia of your book, The Leader's Bookshelf. Is Netanyahu extended, or because of his small geography, can he handle those many fronts?
I think Israel is overextended. I'd say 5 fronts. It's Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north. Obviously, it is the Houthis to the far south. It's also the militias in Syria, and it's Iran itself. I can count that on the 5 fingers of my hand. That's too many. Israel is only a nation of 10 million, 7 million Jews. That's too few to ultimately fight wars with countries like Iran, newsflash, which has a population of 90 million. That's Iran alone. So Israel needs friends. And let's go back to paragraph 1, how important that relationship is for Israel and for the United States, between the U.S. and Israel.
Admiral, I don't want to lose sight of Ukraine. Can you give us your latest thinking on what's happening in Ukraine and how it might play out?
I can, and thank you for raising it, because they are losing oxygen to all that is happening in the Middle East. The situation there remains relatively static. The battle lines are in place. Russians are moving forward very slowly in the east. The Ukrainians have carved a small chunk out of Russia in the north. Ultimately, I think after the election, we are probably headed for a negotiation, because the burn rate, think private equity, the burn rate on both sides of that battle line is terrible. Pressure will be for a negotiation, regardless of who is elected in Washington.
One final question. In your book, The Restless Wave, Kai is trouble. Did you know a Kai in Hawaii, Admiral? Asking for a few. Kai is nothing but trouble in your book, Admiral. Did you know someone like Kai?
Kai is a beautiful Hawaiian woman who ends up in a love triangle. Tom is correct. Between a Navy officer and a Marine Corps officer. So in The Restless Wave, yes, Kai is trouble. And yes, I have met a few beautiful women in Hawaii over the years.
Bottle that.
Yeah, exactly.
James Stavridis, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. The Restless Wave, folks, I can't, it's not going to be my book of the year because Kai's in it. I can't have Kai in my book of the year. Admiral James Stavridis, The Restless Wave. If you love the Winds of War, find it. It's hugely readable. Paul, you're loving it. You're 4 chapters
Four chapters in. I'm ready to go here.
Yeah.
You know, I have long train rides, so it's a
who
great
would
book.
play Scott in the movie?
Oh, exactly.
You wonder who plays Stavridis. But,
exactly.
I think Leonardo.
We'll get Clooney there. Or
Clooney, you think? Yeah, Clooney could be, like Arlie Burke or something.
Yep.
I could see that. James Stavridis there with a new wonderful book, The Restless Wave, on his United States Navy. An interesting day here, one day before important inflation data. Churn to the market. Flat right now, the VIX 21.49. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts after your commute, on your commute across the nation on Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures right now trading mostly lower this morning following the rally led by technology shares yesterday. The NASDAQ, in fact, ended up 1.5% in yesterday's session. Alphabet this morning declining 0.9% with the breakup of Google among the remedies the Justice Department now considering. Google responded in a post. They say the government's blueprint goes well beyond the legal scope of the court's decision, and that government overreach in the fast-moving industry may actually have negative unintended consequences for innovation and American consumers. Palantir Technologies this morning, those shares up 0.6%. Shares of the provider of data analytics software rose 6.6% yesterday's session to a record closing high. And Boeing this morning, those shares, they are down 1.3%. This comes after S&P Global Ratings placed the playmaker's credit rating on Credit Watch negative, with the strike continuing there. Dow futures 43 points lower. That's down 0.1%. The S&P futures 4 points lower. NASDAQ futures right now down 24. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Good morning to all of you across the nation, around the world. Special good morning to Ireland. Greatly appreciate your attendance today on YouTube, and of course on Android Auto and Apple CarPlay and all. And of course, so much of your dollar dynamics have to do with the amount you'll drop in Kinsale, County Cork.
Oh boy.
Most beautiful village in Ireland. Now, with our guest, Surveillance Irish correspondent, Paul Sweeney.
Exactly right. 8 days, 7 nights in Ireland. Had a great time over there. Dara Mar joins us here. He is head of America's Research and head of FX at HSBC. You're based in New York. You're an Irishman based in New York, but you wake up because you're at HSBC and you think about China. What's going on in China? How do you guys view China, the economy, what to do with the currencies over in that part of the world?
I think it's reasonably clear what's going on in China. It's been underwhelming from a growth perspective. There's been a policy response that I think markets have viewed as piecemeal, and now they're hoping for kind of the grand gesture, or not just gesture policies, actual something that will really move the needle in China. The problem we now have, of course, is the market's become incredibly impatient for that to arrive, and we saw that after the Golden Week holiday ended in China. It didn't land immediately, this new fiscal stimulus. And now this morning we hear, well, it might land on Saturday morning, and markets saying, well, that's a long, we're not even close to that yet.
Yep.
But I think ultimately we know where we're heading. We're heading towards more fiscal stimulus in China, helping to underpin growth. And that changes the dynamic, because we've had really only the US economy delivering, if you like, on the growth front. Europe struggling, UK struggling, China struggling. At least if China can do something to normalize it, get it towards 5%, which is our forecast.
That is your forecast still?
That is our forecast,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm looking at the Bloomberg Dollar Index. I mean, it's bounced off its lows from just a few weeks ago, but it's still down 2-3% from the recent highs. What am I doing here in the currency markets here? I can't be short the dollar, can I?
I think the mood has changed. I think you're correct to say you shouldn't be short the dollar. I mean, you can be and be wrong. That's fine. But I think it's there has been a big mood change. Before you went on your holiday, I would have said everybody was comfortable with the idea the dollar was weakening, the Fed was on an aggressive easing campaign, and that was the story.
I spent a lot of euros and a lot of British pounds in that island of yours over there.
Well, it's all about timing.
Yeah.
I think what's noticeable that has changed in the currency markets is not everyone is talking about the Fed. If I'd come here like a few weeks ago, the whole conversation was Fed. Now we talk about Bank of England. Now we talk about ECB, RBNZ overnight. And that's getting traction. That's kind of new.
But the heritage of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, and you guys have been best in class on this, is respect for the resilient dollar.
Right.
Is that respect still there?
Absolutely. I mean, it offers so much at the moment. We're coming into, less than 4 weeks to the US election. Dollar typically trades strong up to election day over this period. It also offers you yield for a safe haven, which is just so bizarre but yet wonderful. And it offers you a resilient economy. I frequently say...
So the foreigners are still going to show up at the counter?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Damien Sassar, you know Damien?
I've heard of him.
If he's on about once every 90 days. Damien Sassar of Bloomberg Intelligence mentioned this, that the carry trade is just huge. I mean, you've got to go to the dollar.
Yeah. I mean, it offers you more than carry, which I think is the key, right? Okay, so you can go to Brazil, get carry. You go to Mexico, get carry. But you know there's a few caveats on the end of that contract, right, about political risk or fiscal risk and all these elements. In the US, you feel that you get that yield, but you're not kind of having to surrender something in terms of risk or risk appetite. So, yeah, I think, dollar, I think, can extend this move.
All right, what I never, ever think about is the Australian dollar, but you write about it in your note here. What drives the Australian dollar?
For the most part, Australia. I mean,
Okay.
I will allow that. For the most part, Australia does drive the Australian dollar. And the RBA, the Reserve Bank there, has been one of the more hawkish voices relative to the rest of G10. So that's been a help. But, of course, we're fixated on China right now and what's going to happen to policy there. Aussie's trading like a China proxy again, right? And it is viewed in the G10 context as the play on China. New Zealand isn't so much, and there's no other real currencies.
Is there a lot of trade, Australia, China?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
There's decent trade links there, as you would expect on the commodity front.
Yep.
So it's very tied to the China cyclical story.
But
right?
is it a range-bound trade? This is Australian renminbi. What do you call that? What's the jargon for Aussie?
Aussie renminbi. I don't know if you've
Aussie
come up with the
yuan?
jargon. No, you'll have to make one up.
I have no idea.
You'll have to make one
Well,
up.
we make up the show all 3,000 seconds every hour. Dara Meyer, how do you play Australia then if it's in a tight trading range to renminbi? What's the pair that's most efficacious?
Yeah, look, I think you're still playing for topside Aussie because it can capitalize on this anticipated fiscal stimulus from China once it arrives, but it can also get that local story to give that extra little bit of turbocharge if the RBA is going to be slow to cut rates. We think it's going to be quite a wait, maybe first quarter of next year, second quarter of next year before the RBA cut interest rates. So, yeah, again, maybe a bit like the dollar, it gives you some yield. It gives you the little China excitement on the side as well. So I think you play Aussie long. Perhaps, Tom, to be honest, less against renminbi, but more against the New Zealand dollar, where you've got this clear policy divergence.
All right, I do read your research. Why is the Mexican peso weaker?
I did wonder who was that person that
Yes,
was reading my research, but
Wow,
mystery solved.
23 people read it.
Exactly. Mexican peso, 19.3. I thought Mexico was like the bomb.
How do we say? It's complicated.
Okay.
Right? So it has, I think, structurally still lots going forward. I think the nearshoring story still plays pretty strong. And it could be amplified depending on the outcome of the US election and the whole tariff outcome there. But at the end of the day, you've got domestic politics, which has clouded sentiment around that. And, it's created market volatility. I think, honestly, people have struggled to call Mexican peso. It was the darling trade alongside Brazil at the beginning of this year, but I think there's been a few casualties as we've moved through the seasons.
How does the U.S. political landscape, the upcoming election, how does that get reflected in your market every day?
I don't think it's happening too much on a day-to-day basis. Interesting, when I go and speak to clients, they all want to talk about the U.S. election and what does this scenario mean for the dollar,
So an
et
Irishman
cetera,
living in New York, you're qualified to
Well, I think you're in the best position, right?
Yes,
in the best
exactly.
position to offer opinions on that. But what I think is interesting, I don't get the sense that many people are positioned for the election outcome. They're curious, they're, and that's true as well when I speak to corporates. Are they hedged for outcomes? Not particularly. They're watchful, but actually I think they're still more fixated on the Fed.
University College Dublin. I took a tour when I was there.
That's
Beautiful.
where I went.
Beautiful. I know. Have you been there? It's just magnificent school. Just grounds and the whole University College Dublin was beautiful.
I have no life. I go nowhere.
Oh, you gotta go.
I go,
Come on.
They're like,
We're gonna get you out of there.
Can I go to Boston Thursday? I get that kind of thing.
Right.
By the way, I like the fact that you're volunteering. That's where you visited, whereas you started our conversation talking about Bushmills and Jameson whiskey.
Yes, exactly.
And now you're pretending that you spent all your time at the seat of education.
I try to go to local universities to tour because I just like university campuses and things like that. So, but
Trinity's beautiful.
Trinity's beautiful. Yeah.
Fantastic.
They gave us David Kelly, but that, it's
J.P. Morgan, right?
Dara Meyer, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. With HSBC, really can't say enough about it. Can we do a shout out?
Sure.
This is across the Don du Midi in Switzerland. Good morning, continental Europe. I spent an informative summer once at Lausanne in Switzerland. I was hugely advantaged to do this. And there were two schools. It's confusing. Lausanne and Lausanne.
Oh, boy.
Like they almost sound the same.
Yep.
Can we say good morning to Conrad?
Go.
In a high school in Lausanne, who listens to the program every day and is getting it done at the collegiate level.
Okay.
Good morning, Conrad. We
Very
wish
good.
we had his life.
I know.
I mean, the guy's styling. I mean, he's there on Lake Geneva. Life is tough. Good morning, Conrad, in Lausanne, Switzerland.
We can do shout-outs to every single listener, in fact.
Yeah, we can do that.
Every single one.
We're up to 42 listeners. Not easy, John. I mean,
YouTube. It's all about YouTube, John. That's the future, buddy.
yeah, it's the future.
It's the internet.
No question about it. Right now, we need
what the
a
kids are doing.
news update. Tigers tonight with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and John. Storm surge warnings are in effect up and down Florida's west coast as Hurricane Milton approaches the peninsula. The National Hurricane Center warns the storm surge from the Category 5 storm will cause an extremely life-threatening situation. That strong storm surge will include heavy winds and flooding. This man who lives in Cape Coral evacuated.
I could have stayed. I could have taken a chance. I know other people in my zone that aren't evacuating, but I thought, well, I'll just have a little staycation and play it safe and, and hope my house is there when I get back.
Milton is expected to make landfall late tonight. We're learning more about Bob Woodward's new book. War is set to be released next week. According to the book, Donald Trump, while president, sent American-made coronavirus tests in 2020 to Russian President Vladimir Putin during a crippling shortage in the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke about the accusation during an appearance on CBS Late Night with Stephen Colbert.
This man is giving COVID test kits to Vladimir Putin? Think about what this means, on top of him sending love letters to Kim Jong-un.
Meanwhile, Trump is denying he has spoken several times to Putin since leaving the White House, as reported in the book. Woodward also says President Biden had profanity-laced outbursts about Putin and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in private. Biden's reported anger toward Netanyahu boiled over in the spring of 2024, claiming Netanyahu was not actually interested in defeating Hamas, but in protecting himself, calling him an SOB in front of his advisors. Republican vice presidential nominee Senator J.D. Vance was on the campaign trail delivering remarks at a rally in Detroit. Vance took aim at Vice President Harris's interview on ABC's The View yesterday. Harris told the host that she couldn't think of anything she would have done differently than President Biden.
Think about this. For the last 2 months, Kamala Harris has been telling the American people that she's going to do things differently than Joe Biden.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Okay, so the ratings are in, and they're ginormous for baseball. Yankees 3 million plus. The Cleveland Guardians and the Detroit Tigers have proven the least attractive of the games, averaging just 1.9 million viewers on TBS. 89% were in Detroit and Cleveland. I mean, it's huge, Paul, that they need Dodgers-Yankees to get this done.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've learned about, which we all know for the longest time is baseball is a regional sport. It's a localized sport, as opposed to the NFL.
Where is there Pete Rozelle? Where is whatever made the NFL not a regional sport? When I was watching Johnny Unitas and YA.
Yeah, it's a great. I don't know the answer to that other than there's far fewer games. You only have now they have a lot of games, but you don't have 162 games, so it's a big national event. Yeah,
Michael Barr. I mean, the Detroit Lions were a bauble of the Ford family, and now they're beloved worldwide. How did he make the shift? Does baseball make the shift?
Well, one thing is like sports fans do like when underdogs start to come through. That's why, I think eventually we will, man. The Tigers, we're playing on house mode.
Okay.
Yeah, this is fun. I love to see Cleveland, Detroit, two old
John, help
American
us. We're
cities.
so off the rails right now. Futures at -3 from New York City. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg News with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures are slipping this morning, pressured by news the Justice Department weighing a breakup of Google. Bloomberg Intelligence, by the way, says a breakup of the ad tech business. That's probably the most likely outcome. Chinese stocks listed onshore suffering their biggest drop in more than 4 years. The CSI 300 index that plunged 7.1%. Boeing withdrawing its contract offer, saying talks with its largest union don't make sense at this point. Those shares are lower in the pre-market. For what it's worth, unemployment below pre-pandemic levels in 6 of 7 swing states. This is according to a Bloomberg analysis of BLS data in Arizona and Pennsylvania. It's improved by more than 1 percentage point. And right now we have the Dow futures down 25, S&P futures 2 points lower, the NASDAQ futures down 23. And Goldman Sachs says it sees upside of up to $20 to Brent crude in the case of disruptions in Iranian production. As we look at Brent crude right now, the international benchmark, that is down 44 cents, 76.74 a barrel. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Do you care to share? What are you laughing at?
I'm laughing at Paul because what you see, folks, off camera is sometimes better than the show. Paul, discuss.
Goldman Sachs, where were you 2 weeks ago when I needed you on this call? It is just, I mean, I was a sell side for 25 years, but sometimes I just shake my head.
Eric, make a note. We need to get David Costin in. My good friend David Costin in, so Paul can get further upset. Folks, it's a brutal. Think how many people were wrong on China.
Yeah.
And they came out with 2 announcements. Oops. The other way. There we go. It's a sport. Bloomberg Surveillance. And we're brought to you by IBKR. It's the Kaylee Lines Hour. And we're brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. Okay, folks, not once, not twice, and Paul and I, we don't give our opinion and all that. With Kaylee Lines with us with Balance of Power, she is doing the journalism inside the Beltway. Not once, not twice. Kaylee, yesterday, people somewhat engaged in the election said to me, how bad was the last 48 hours for the vice president of the United States? Kaylee Lines, how bad was the last 48 hours for Harris?
Well, I would argue it's more than a 48-hour window, Tom. It has been a rough week and change as you've had, of course, escalating tensions in the Middle East, which reignites concerns about the administration's policy toward Israel, which could potentially lose her votes in a state with a heavy Arab and Muslim concentration like Michigan. You also had concern over a strike that luckily only lasted 3 days when it comes to the dock workers. And, of course, 2 natural disasters that are hitting in quick succession. Hurricane Helene and less than 2 weeks later, Hurricane Milton barreling toward the coast of Florida. A natural disaster like that, of course, first and foremost is a humanitarian catastrophe. It could be an economic disaster as well, but it does create a bit of political difficulty as it presents an opportunity for Harris to look presidential, to express empathy to people, but also if there is any weaknesses in the federal response, she is part of this administration and she could face blowback because of that.
Who's running her campaign? She brought in the Obama crew, including David Plouffe, who's been on surveillance many times. Are they still calling the shots? Or how's that dynamic that you and Joe report on each and every day?
Yeah, they are still calling the shots. A lot of the campaign infrastructure of what was the Biden-Harris campaign, now the Harris-Walz campaign, has remained the same, though, like Plouffe, she has brought some new people in. This is a very organized and targeted messaging campaign. They, of course, have kept her pretty limited in the press. She's changing that this week as she does this kind of media blitz. The Call Her Daddy podcast over the weekend, then 60 Minutes yesterday. She did The View and Howard Stern, and ultimately The Late Show where she was drinking Miller High Life.
Yeah, but Cy, do we have Vice President Harris Friday? We don't. Okay. Continue.
She does have a standing invitation to join us here on Bloomberg Radio, Tom. Television as well. But she's starting to do more of these interviews. She'd been facing a lot of criticism for not doing so. Now we're seeing, in a very targeted way, focus on specific audiences. Young women with Call Her Daddy. Howard Stern trying to reach out to more men, which of course is one of her weaker points. And so they're starting to do this. We'll see how much it continues. And of course, with a natural disaster like this one, it is likely to change the nature of the campaign for both her and for Donald Trump, who may pull some of their other visits to other areas to focus on the response to this disaster.
Kaylee, we're less than a month away to the election. Any sense as to whether either campaign will pivot on terms of how they're positioning themselves, or is kind of what we see over the last several weeks is kind of what we're going to get for the next 3.5 weeks?
I'm not sure anyone can predict that, Paul, as already we've had a number of October surprises, and the month isn't even halfway over. Right. There is still a lot could happen in this less than 4-week period. What we don't have is any kind of scheduled catalyst. There is no more debates, for example. While Kamala Harris had floated another one against Donald Trump at the end of October, he has not agreed to that. So there's nothing that is firmly on the agenda that we can point to and say, okay, that could be a turning point. It could just come in the form of surprises like what we're seeing with Hurricane Helene. And of course, we're likely to continue to see the blitzing of the swing states as they fight it out in these battlegrounds that could decide the Electoral College. One thing I would point to is new surrogates that are going to come more onto the circuit, including for Kamala Harris, former President Barack Obama. He will be making his presence known in these final few weeks of the race.
Does Donald Trump have surrogates?
Oh, he has plenty of surrogates, some of them frequently on this network, Paul, or Tom, rather, including people who were running against him in the Republican primary. So think Doug Burgum, Senator Tim Scott as well. There's members of Congress like Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida who are surrogates for him. And some former members of his administration.
Come on. Elephant in the room. Elephant, get it?
Yeah.
I'm showing Kaylee how tied in I am. Elephant in the room, Kaylee Lyons, is the governor of the Carolinas, is not one of those surrogates, is she?
Well, no. Nikki Haley has endorsed him and said she would make herself available if the Trump campaign asked her to participate, but that ask has not happened. There might still be a little love lost there, if you will, Tom. I would also point out there's no Republican president or former president, rather, that is campaigning on behalf of Donald Trump, as we're seeing with the former Democratic presidents, not just Obama, but Clinton as well. Jimmy Carter, now 100 years old, saying he wants to be able to live through this election to cast a vote for her. And there isn't that same institutional support necessarily in the older guard of the Republican Party. You mentioned the governor of the Carolinas, Nikki Haley, Tom. There's also the governor of Florida, who Ron DeSantis has endorsed him. And DeSantis, of course, is in the spotlight with this storm, but has had some praise for President Biden and the federal government's handling of this to this point, as those two are in communication, even if Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris are not.
You hope the politics is pushed aside, given the violence of these two storms that we see. Rob Carolyn will report later. Kaylee Lyons, thank you for that update. Balance of Power at noon with Joe Matthew, and again at 5, dashing into the key time. This is fun.
Yeah.
What do you think, Paul, the election week? I mean, I think it's going to be extended.
Well, I think you're right, Tom. I think, as we heard from like Joe Matthew and others, we're probably not going to know at the end of the night on election night a winner. So this may drag on for days afterwards, and then I don't know what the legal challenges will be from either side and how that'll play out. That seems to be almost the new normal.
Should we get back to economics, finance, investment?
I'd love to.
CPI tomorrow, 8:30.
Inflation.
Disinflation. CPI headline year over year comes down on survey from 2.5 to 2.3.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the screen says.
Yep, exactly right. And I mean, I think that's the trend that we've seen, Tom. Again, on a month-to-month basis, which some of the smart people like to look at it. I'm a year-to-year person, but some of the smart people say, look at it, ex-food and energy on a month-to-month basis, 0.2%.
Claims.
0.3%. Yeah, exactly.
Claims as well on a Thursday.
You get University of Michigan, not just good football. They have good economists there at the University of Michigan, so we'll hear about that on Friday as well.
You missed our Texas A&M extravaganza yesterday.
I understand.
I wore a Texas A&M bow tie.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
Mr. McTeer sent it to me once, which was
very nice.
Very kind of him. And we had
Aggies.
on a fighting Aggie, a member of the Corps of Cadets at Red Lobster. Jessica Menton.
Okay,
was
very
with
good.
us.
Good.
She survived.
Great representative.
I don't think she'll ever do it again. What do we do? It's -3. The political turmoil, the upset in the markets. You listen to Huw. Bloomberg Surveillance.
When I sing along with you, everything
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Mateo on assignment. John Tucker pulls the short straw this morning. We'll go to our surveillance congestion correspondent in a moment. An interesting day here into CPI tomorrow. We mentioned that. Claims in CPI tomorrow. Paul mentions on to Friday, PPI and the Michigan number. So it's 2 days of excitement here in economics. We may, Paul, see if the disinflation tendency is still in place.
Exactly right. I mean, that's what the numbers are kind of telling you here, Tom. So gives the Fed, some leeway to maybe continue to lower some rates here.
Great set of guests today. Thank you, James Stavridis, for coming on. Sweeney's reading
great.
a book. I'm not. I'll have to fix that. But it was a really, really good conversation. Wendy Schiller with us. Gina Martin Adams on the equity market. Huw van Steenis from London. Catch up with him. And we're going to do some real estate chat here later on.
Yeah.
So please stay with us on YouTube, on your commute across the nation this morning, on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, the Corridor, Washington, 99.1 FM, Bloomberg 1130 in Metz, New York, Yankees too, and 92.9 FM in Red Sox purgatory. We'll get there. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by Cohn Resnick Advisory, Assurance Tax Discover, optimization strategies that are helping CFOs make their finance function more competitive, more resilient. Talk to Cohn Resnick's advisors. For the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, after yesterday's tech-led rally, futures slightly lower this morning. S&P futures, they are down about 5 points. Google parent Alphabet slipping about 0.9% after the Justice Department told a federal judge it's considering recommending that Google be forced to sell off parts of its operations. Boeing shares falling 1.7%. Negotiations to end the almost month-long strike, they apparently have collapsed. Saturday marks the 2-year anniversary of the bull market run in U.S. stocks. S&P 500 has soared 60% in the past 2 years. And U.S. mortgage rates jumping last week by the most since July of 2023. Sorry, Paul. The contract rate on a 30-year increasing 22 basis points. Right now, 6.36%. Here's one for you. Salaries in New York City's securities industry falling for a second consecutive year in 2023 as profits retreated from the highs reached during the pandemic. The average salary, $471,370. That includes bonuses, according to the state controller, Thomas DiNapoli's annual report.
How long has that guy been in? I've been reading his reports forever. He's the guy.
That's a good question.
Check it out.
But that's something they do. It's something everybody looks forward to. S&P futures, once again, 3 points lower. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
And John Tucker, thanks so much. Joining us now, and for Global Wall Street, it's time to lean forward. He's with PineBridge Investments, which is, managing money and that, a huge heritage with AIG. Stephen O joins us, global head of fixed income, except he writes like PhD sell side. His notes are absolutely exquisite. And the key thing, Stephen O, in your note is it's not time to be defensive. How do you be offensive in fixed income?
Well, by writing that, it was really looking forward to the fact that despite the tight valuations, the economic environment, as well as the Fed as global central bank easing cycle, will continue to be supportive of risk assets. So what does that imply for not being defensive? It means that the natural bias in that environment would be defensive, but at a minimum, you take your exposure up to a beta-type risk exposure and take pot shots at targeted opportunities. What you don't want to do is go hyper defensive in this type of environment where yield is likely to carry the day.
So is that simply Paul Sweeney buys a 30-year New Jersey hospital bond? Is that what that devolves down to?
Well, I guess it depends on, that's a lot of security selection risk there, so I can't opine on that. But I think broadly speaking in terms of where is the risk component in fixed income, right? It's going to be in the credit segments. And that's where you don't want to be hyper defensive.
All right, something we don't talk about, but I think it kind of goes to where you're going, which is talk to us about the leverage loan market. What is that, and how do investors get exposure to that?
Well, leverage loan in its simplest form is corporate debt that's syndicated and secured by assets of the business. In the simplest history, it was really loans that were issued by banks, but of course, banks are not really in the origination of debt anymore. They're in the intermediary business. And the loans that they used to originate, which primarily back leverage buyouts, have now moved to an institutional market where it trades very freely. Of course, the adjacent market that's talked about ad nauseum for the last 5-6 years is the private credit market as well.
And are there opportunities there, do you see? I mean, is that something that if you want to take up maybe even a little more risk than above and beyond high yield, that's the market you look at?
Well, first, I wouldn't say that it's higher risk than high yield. It's really adjacency risk because those are both below investment grade corporate credit. But what you are getting right now is the credit spread over base rates is elevated, and it's one of the few places where you are getting excess yield. Loan spreads right now for the index is over 400 basis points, which is over 100 basis points over the high yield index, but you do have to adjust that for like risk, because the way to look at it is oftentimes there's a tendency to look at asset class to asset class, and you have to look at ratings to ratings or like risk to like risk, and you're still getting a premium for that component.
Talk to somebody not as sophisticated. They're in a money market fund going, this is too good to be true. Are money market fund yields now too good to be true?
Well, money markets funds by nature are very short term, and it's been a great place to be, although one could make the case that perhaps there was opportunity cost of not being in equities. Where you look at the yield today, and given the shape of the curve at the short end where Fed funds and so forth is, money market optically provides you a very high yield, but you have to look forward. That yield is going to come down. And so I think it's just a matter of, do you utilize money market as primarily a return-seeking area, or do you use it as a liquidity while you hide out in what is acceptable returns at this point in time?
Kids use it as a liquidity.
All right, Stephen, John Tucker and I, we've been trying to get Tom out of his triple leverage all-cash fund.
Nope.
I've got the Fed that's cutting rates, and I'm not in a recession. Shouldn't Tom be taking some risk here?
Well, I think anybody's risk appetite is a function of where they're at. For all I know, Tom may be so wealthy that he should be taking a lot more risk.
He's got that right.
He's in NVIDIA
John,
long.
you want to chime in on that?
Oh, yeah. What's that tuition bill now?
Thank you.
Exactly.
Continue, Mr. O.
And in terms of where do you want to be in terms of risk right now, I think a balanced approach is the best approach, because in certain market environments, the time you want to take risk, and I think Warren Buffett said it best, is when there's a lot of trauma out there, when there's fear in the marketplace. There is not much fear in the marketplace out there right now. So I don't think this is an environment where you want to start adding more risk to your portfolio. It's simply a type of market environment where you want to be balanced in your approach, because nothing looks particularly cheap, but it's hard to see anything that's going to cause a meaningful sell-off in the near term.
September was, I think, a record month for investment-grade issuance. So when Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all those folks were ringing you guys, were you picking up the phone buying this new stuff?
Well, we constantly look at not only what is the value coming to the marketplace, but what is the value in relation to what's trading in the secondary markets overall. And typically there are some new issue concessions, although at times that has been very anemic. And so we have been targeted in our approach to buying some of those new issuance. There have been some.
So you don't buy everything that comes across the transom?
We're not a $10 trillion asset manager that has to be beta. We pick and choose, and we manage a very targeted alpha approach portfolio.
Stephen, thank you. Stephen O. with PineBridge. Brilliant note. Again, we protect the copyright of all of our guests. Look to PineBridge Investments for Stephen O.'s brilliance. Futures flat, not much going on. VIX 21.42, a dollar stronger. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Very much, Tom, Paul, and John. Hurricane Milton is turning closer to the west coast of Florida. The National Hurricane Center predicts Milton will make landfall late tonight near the Tampa Bay region. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor noted that up to 15 feet of storm surge forecast for her city would be deep enough to swallow an entire house. This Sarasota resident says he wants to make this his last hurricane season in Florida.
I'm out of here. I'm tired of Florida. I'm tired of hurricanes. I'm done.
President Biden is staying in Washington to manage the hurricane response. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons has more from Washington.
There's been a lot of misinformation that has been being put out and propagated by Donald Trump and his allies, falsely claiming, for example, that FEMA is only providing $750 to people who lost their homes, or that $1 billion in FEMA money went missing because it was stolen for migrants. Those things are not true. Even Republican Congressman Chuck Edwards of North Carolina had to put out a statement yesterday to knock down some of these online rumors, including saying no one can control the weather, because that is a narrative that has been circulating out there.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons in Washington. A new book by journalist Bob Woodward includes reported details of former President Donald Trump's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to the book War, the pair have had private phone calls since Trump left office. A Trump spokesperson says Woodward's reporting is not true. Woodward also reports President Biden has privately expressed profanity-laced criticism of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling him a bad guy in the spring of this year as Israel ramped up its deadly attacks on Gaza. 3 scientists were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for breakthrough research into proteins. The award goes to David Baker, Demis Hassabis, and John Jumper. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
So, Michael, we're trying to extend maturities for Paul Sweeney. Muni bond analyst Taylor Swift says of Stone Harbor, New Jersey, it's a cute little harbor town in New Jersey. Median home price, $4.5 million.
It is a spectacular part of the Jersey Shore. It's down near Cape May. It's the most southern part of the state.
Yeah.
And it is spectacular. Barrier Island, just beautiful down there.
They're just popping a 20-year piece here. The yield is 3.55%. Trading, it's just popped 102. It's already up to 103. You can't get that. You can't buy GOs of little cute Taylor Swift towns.
Exactly.
Who buys that stuff? Who gets it?
I don't know.
Friends of the mayor?
Friends of the family, I guess. Yeah. So, T Swift, big Jersey. She's from that Philadelphia area, and folks from the Philly area. They
always
go to South
vacation at the Jersey Shore.
They vacation Jersey Shore and not on the South Shore. John and I were up in the northern part of the
I'm
state.
sure I ran into her on the beach
of course.
at some point.
but someone in Stone Harbor, they wouldn't be caught dead on the deck, would they? Taking the C Street.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't be trashing my town.
Yeah.
Just stop that.
It's a perfectly nice thing. But yeah, the Philadelphia people, they go to the South Jersey Shore. New York-centric people go to the north part of
Where do the New York Mets? How's Trenton doing this morning with Philly Mets?
Oh,
I mean,
they're fired up. I mean, they got the Phillies half and half, split right down the middle, I'm sure. But I would say Trenton is by and large a Philly town.
Right. Do you know we got through 1.25 hours without talking about the Detroit Tigers?
I know.
We ain't done yet.
America's team. We'll get to that in a moment. Right now in economics, finance, investment, we're looking at oil. And Paul's pulled back. We had an 81 print for a cup of Tang a couple days ago. Brent crude 81 down to 77.34, flat this morning. 73.74 on West Texas Intermediate. And gold, again, is one of the indicators of the tension there that Admiral Stavridis talked about, 26.41 on gold. So it's a little quieter.
Yeah, so it's a little quieter. It's a little quieter. But again, your VIX there at 21, Tom, and change.
Yeah,
so we'll keep an eye on that.
It was at 22-ish, came in nicely. And I'm going to call it Cherney now. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures right now, they are lower to little changed after yesterday's tech-led rally. We had a 1.5% gain for the NASDAQ. Investors this morning fretting about the prospect of an antitrust crackdown on Google owner Alphabet. The crisis engulfing Boeing taking a dramatic turn. Negotiations are resolved, an almost month-long strike collapsing. Also, S&P Global Ratings warning it may cut the playmaker's credit grade to junk. The impasse leaving Boeing with no real clear path forward to overcome this debilitating strike. Friday, J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo kicking off the first bank earnings season since the Fed's 50 basis rate cut last month, a 50 basis point. All eyes are going to be on the forecast for the full year net interest income. The difference between what a bank collects on loans and pays out to depositors. Also, their biggest source of revenue. Right now, the Dow futures down 3, S&P futures down 2, the NASDAQ futures 32 points lower. Hormel Foods, ticker HRL, makes Planters, and this is having absolutely no impact on the stock whatsoever. Planters ushering in the start of the holiday season with a new limited edition flavor, toasted marshmallow hot chocolate cashews.
What?
I know you're all over that.
Un-American.
What are you doing?
Isn't that awesome? Anyway,
you're no Lisa Mateo. If Lisa said that, it'd be charming.
She should be back next week. So brace yourself.
She's on assignment.
Special assignment.
Churning right now in the markets, and we'll get to them. Gina Martin Adams joining us here in about 45 minutes. An important conversation on equities. Professor Schiller now from Brown University, doing so much for the Taubman Center for their international relations. I guess it's a close election, Wendy, and I guess there's a lot of tension. And I remember sitting there in shock after Bush-Gore going, how close is close? Almost like, I think it was Kennedy-Humphrey in 1960. I really can't remember, with Mayor Daley. Clyde Haberman, the New York Times 24 years ago on this day, highfalutin but hardly proud of it. He was talking about fancy Yale people that went to Brown or Yale or whatever, fancy Ivy League people, dumbing it down to get elected. Is that what we're seeing right now? Is everybody going basic, for a couple, 4 weeks here because they have to?
Well, Tom, I first want to address this is exactly what I've been talking about, Bush-Gore. Statistical polling within the margin of error. As you remember, they were absolutely statistically tied going into that election. One day one would be 48, the other would be 45. So exactly what you're pointing out is that everyone said, oh, this is historic. We've never seen anything like it. Yes, we have. If you're old enough, we saw it in 2000. And that aftermath of that election was a bit messy, we can say. So I think we have to brace ourselves for that. So I don't actually think that they're dumbing down. I think that the Trump campaign, he can go off the ranch sometimes, has been disciplined in its messaging on border security and inflation. That's, basically pocketbook issues and security issues. And Kamala Harris tried to raise the conversation about her economic plan. It didn't take. So now she's simplifying it. I'm simply going to make your life economically better. That's what she's doing, and leaving off some of that.
Okay, and Paul wants to jump in here. Is that policy, Professor Schiller, to say, I want you to feel good, or whatever, whichever candidate? I don't want to pick sides, but is that what our policies devolve down to, is feel-good statements?
Well, the problem is, as we've discussed before, is that the federal government is so large now. And it is so enmeshed in every American's life on multiple dimensions that most people don't even grasp how involved it is. So discussing a simple policy change is not simple, because any policy change will ripple through a set of federal programs and affect lots of different people in different ways. So it's not as easy as it used to be to say, I'm going to do A, and you're going to feel it in 6 months. It just doesn't happen in America anymore.
Hey, Wendy, let's fast forward to maybe the evening of November 5th, maybe the early morning hours, November 6th, maybe bleeding into the day of November 6th. Are we going to know anything? How is this going to play out, do you think?
I think we faced the situation in 2020 as well. I think there are going to be some states. You can expect Georgia, you can expect Arizona in particular, those states. And Pennsylvania, by the way, doesn't, to my knowledge, does not open mail-in ballots till after they count the in-person ballots. And if there are legal challenges for hand counting, not just in Georgia and Arizona, but other places, it will slow down considerably. Wisconsin also. So unless, which we don't expect, one candidate is just going to run the table, we're probably not going to know very much until the weekend, at the soonest. And it will be up to secretaries of state, attorney generals, governors to certify election results and make sure that county level election officials certify those results in a timely fashion. That's going to get messy pretty quickly.
Turnout. What do we expect for turnout, Wendy? Do we expect this to be a high turnout election, a low turnout election, and does it favor one or the other?
Well, I'm going to crib from one of my colleagues here at Brown who said that she expects that it will be lower than even 2020 because of mail-in balloting being so predominant in 2020, but that the general level of enthusiasm is still high among Trump core and, is pretty high among Democrats, if you can call it enthusiasm or fear, one or the other. But it's not quite the same as it was in 2018, 2020, when we saw historic midterm and presidential election turnouts. There's still a little bit of ambivalence. And voters don't like to regret their choice. They don't want to regret their vote. So if they're still uncertain on election day, they may very well just stay home.
Wendy Schiller, I know with the electoral quality of Rhode Island that Vice President Harris should have been sipping a Narragansett lager beer the other night, but instead she went with the champagne of Wisconsin beers, Miller High Life. Okay, what is the symbolism of sipping a beer on TV? What does that get you politically?
Well, Bill Clinton went to McDonald's. Barack Obama had to find some food that was bad for him that he was willing to eat on camera because we knew he didn't do it otherwise. This is part of, I can identify with you. I'll drink a beer too. I think it's a stretch. I don't think that's the image necessarily that's going to get Kamala Harris elected. But I think each candidate and each campaign right now is really like, what do we do to get this momentum?
Okay,
what do we do
address
to get the
it.
edge?
Your advice, in the time we've got left, you get 30 seconds, Trump. What's the Schiller to do for Trump? What's the Schiller to do for Harris?
Trump, I'll make the United States safer. I'll make you safer. I'll make the world safer. Kamala Harris, I'm going to make your economic life better. I'm going to protect your working rights, your minimum wage, your health care, the fundamental things you need to live a good life. The Democrats always protect, the Republicans always try to destroy.
Can you imagine in her class, I'm pulling a C minus, and she's looking at me with an 8 in her eyes.
I know.
Professor Schiller, thank you
hang with her.
so much, from Brown University there. That's why I love just short and sweet.
Yep.
And you have to believe, maybe with President Trump, maybe with Vice President Harris, that's happening this morning.
Yeah.
There's people saying, okay, we need to adjust.
Yep, absolutely.
On this dash. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lyons.
3.5
We'll talk
weeks.
about that later. Important news on the Steele Sweeney escape from Orlando. Which ride did you like at Magic Kingdom?
Space Mountain. Still my fave.
Shut down.
Still my fave. It's good. Yeah. So Disney closing their parks here today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Disney World has only closed 9 times due to hurricanes in its 5 decades of operation. The most recent closure was due to Hurricane Nicole in 2022. So they don't do this lightly. And again, we were there a couple of days ago on the park, and it was tons of people there.
Wait, Space Mountain?
Yeah.
That's like going way
I know.
back.
It's still good. It's still good. It still holds its own. But it's a lot of good stuff. But anyway, people were there, and they were like, hurricane be damned. So you're going to have to get these people out of the park.
I looked the other day, Red O'Keeper of the Amex, I said, I think his hair's getting grayer.
Yeah, well, wait till he sees my bill coming back.
Did you send the bill coming back? Did you nail him for the whole valet ride there where he free?
Absolutely. All the passes,
the whole thing?
Oh, yeah.
What's that, $500 a day?
Yeah, they clip you for everything there. It's amazing how good they are at separating you from your hard-earned money there, and they do it better than anybody. And they also move people around better than anybody.
Right.
It's just, they do a phenomenal job.
What'd you learn quickly from the people of Commonwealth? They do so much to support our economics. You were down there with Commonwealth. What was the mood of their 2,000 advisors?
It's kind of what you talk about, Tom, the courage to be in the market. It's easy to sit in your cash at 4.5%, 5%. It's to get people to really think about getting into the market and taking some riskier longer term.
Alex Steele, wait, you brought her back, right?
Yeah, she's back.
Okay, are you you together today?
Yes,
or she's
exactly.
taking the month off.
No, she'll be back. Thankfully.
Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, look for that, the 10 a.m. hour this morning. Churn to the market, really quiet. CPI tomorrow at 8:30. Michael McKee leading our coverage. Oil from 81 down to 77.06. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Fears of a crackdown on big tech, they've been around for a while, but the prospect of an actual breakup, a push for Google, that seems to be weighing on sentiment this morning. The Justice Department said it's considering asking a judge to force Alphabet's Google search engine to sell parts of its business. Alphabet shares, they are down 0.5% pre-market. Chinese stocks, they suffered their biggest drop in more than 4 years. Traders growing impatient over the pace of Beijing's stimulus measures. The CSI 300 index, that plunged 7.1%. As we look at futures right now, the Dow futures, they're down 17. S&P E-mini futures down 2 points right now. NASDAQ futures down 29 points. Yesterday, we had a tech-led rally with the NASDAQ finishing up just about 1.5%. Tesla enjoying its best ever quarter for Chinese shipments. Vehicles delivered from its Shanghai factory rose for a third consecutive month. Just getting that news. Shares of Tesla in the pre-market, they're actually down 0.1% right now. And Boeing down 1.7% pre-market. There does not appear to be a path forward to ending its crippling machinist strike. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Into the economic indicators, particularly tomorrow, CPI, and on Friday, a plethora of data as well. We are supported with our economic indicators, brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors. They are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. We have exactly 2 sets of guests. We have Damian Sassower, where we cancel him and his people have a total tantrum.
Exactly.
It's like Bart, they have a total cow. And then we have people that are graceful. We threw Amanda Gotti under the bus a couple days ago, CIO, PNC National Bank, and she was a complete class act to step away for breaking news, and we get her on here for a good conversation this morning. Amanda, the CPI news tomorrow, I've underplayed it. I think I'm wrong. How big a deal is it?
Well, it's great to be with you guys as always. I'm always game for catching up with you, no matter what the schedule gives us on any given day. I'm not feeling particularly bothered by the next CPI report. I kind of think it might be a bit of a snoozer. I don't think that there's that much there relative to kind of what we know already that's going to change the trajectory of the market or, frankly, Fed policy from here. So we want to pay close attention to it. There are definitely some drivers that continue to create some inflationary fire in the backdrop. Like, I'm most interested in what's happening on the services side. But I don't know that it's all that big of a deal here at this point, given that we did already get the first Fed rate cut. And I think we have a pretty good sense of the path forward from here.
So, Amanda, we're about to kick off another earnings season this Friday with our good friends at JP Morgan. What are you looking for from this earnings this quarter?
I'm looking for upside surprises, which sounds like the dumbest thing ever because isn't that what everybody's looking for? But given that we've had pretty significant negative revisions over the course of Q3, I think this earnings season is going to be pretty pivotal. We exited the earnings recession as a function of Q2 earnings season. If you take out the top 7 names, we finally posted positive earnings growth for the S&P 500, but we're kind of grinding to a halt here for Q3. So I really would like to see a bit of a reacceleration in terms of the results coming out of earnings season. And I think given that the bar is set much lower here, it has to come in the form of upside surprises.
I got the 10-year Treasury north of 4% yet again. What do I do in the fixed income market, Amanda?
Well, we obviously have that first Fed rate cut. We think they're going to be on a path to sort of systematically cutting rates from here. So we're certainly putting cash to the extent that it's sitting on the sidelines here to work. But it's really hard to go long duration in this environment. Interest rate volatility is going to continue to be pretty elevated. The longer portion of the curve from like 10 years out to 30 is still very, very flat. So investors really aren't getting paid to take on that kind of duration risk. So we're really kind of focused in the belly of the curve. We think that's where the most movement and the most opportunities for investors are to reallocate.
Amanda, you were at Legg Mason years ago, and they had Bill Miller, who was absolutely legendary in not getting into value traps. And Bill, good morning. I hope he's listening. Bill Miller, the ups and downs of it all and all that. But the answer is it's about avoiding value traps if you want to be measured in your portfolio at PNC National Bank. How do you avoid value traps?
Well, it's a great question, and I wish I had a perfect crystal ball answer for you, but I think it really comes back to looking at the underlying fundamentals and really kind of getting a sense of where valuations are. What is the price investors are willing to pay, and justifiably so, as it relates to the fundamental backdrop? And, we've seen a lot of movement into small and mid-cap parts of the market, even emerging markets more recently. I think some cyclicals are starting to see some signs of life, but we haven't really seen that turn or that inflection point in the underlying fundamentals. So I think it's a little bit of a hold your horses as it relates to backing up the truck in areas like value, but we're certainly watching that area very, very carefully because I think that has the potential to be the most interesting opportunities heading into 2025. Just feels a little bit early right now.
And Amanda, many of our listeners and our YouTube viewers, they've only known a market where tech leads the market higher. Can tech continue to lead this market higher?
Well, it's not only tech, but it's basically NVIDIA, right? That's been the entire story here for, the better part of the last couple of years. I still very much believe in the strength of the sort of secular theme around AI, automation, technological innovation. So I think that they still continue to be in a leadership position, but I think you're starting to see a little bit of a regime change. Really, since the inflection point at the middle of the year, we've started to see a broadening in terms of participation as the Fed continues to kind of lower rates systematically here. I do think we get broader based participation so that tech actually does hand off the baton. Right. And frankly, that's a healthy outcome to keep this market rally going.
Amanda, I know you don't do the political act. I don't want to get in trouble with the general counsel and PNC Bank or Stuart Hoffman, whichever's more vicious. But I do want to talk to you.
They're both tough, let me tell you.
They're both tough. Hoffman's incredibly difficult. But Amanda, I want to talk about the state of the Pittsburgh economy that you and PNC National Bank. I can look out at, Point Breeze or Squirrel Hill and go, wow, everything's perfect. But that's not the real Pittsburgh. How's Pittsburgh doing?
I think Pittsburgh is doing pretty well, but I think Pittsburgh is very much a reflection of the Main Street economy. So there is some improvement in this post-pandemic world, but it's still tough out there. And there are still, I think, challenges in terms of where the lower end consumer is. That's very much a reflection of parts of Pittsburgh. It's certainly very much a reflection of the Main Street economy here. And so we're certainly gaining on it. We're nowhere near back to pre-pandemic activity levels. And so I think seeing that the Fed is starting to lower rates here is actually going to benefit those who need it the most, right? The Fed rate cut doesn't really have anything to do with the S&P 500. It's much more about bolstering the Main Street economy. So we're gaining on it, but we still have a ways to go.
Those of you on Bloomberg Radio don't have the advantage of YouTube. Are we looking at Office of the Month for Amanda Agati?
Amanda's got
she's got. I mean,
rate my background.
It's like a real office. Remember those days?
Exactly.
I am in a real office. Yes, believe it or not.
So, Amanda, you're for better or worse, you're in a swing state. We are not in a swing state here in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. What's the airwaves? What are the ad environment when you pop on your TV in the evening? Are you just overwhelmed with political ads?
Yes, completely. It's everywhere I turn and everywhere I look. Of course, we're in the countdown here to the final stages of this really pivotal election cycle. So it is everywhere as it relates to the state of Pennsylvania for sure.
So Las Vegas Steelers this weekend, I think it is. CBS, 4 p.m. Are there going to be blimps over the stadium, Trump and Harris?
Probably.
I would put my money on yes, for sure.
Amanda, thank you so much.
It'd be nice to have a PNC blimp, I think. Maybe I should call Huw Hoffman and see if he can make that happen.
Yeah, talk to Stuart. I mean, T. Rowe Price of Baltimore. They're all over the Baltimore dugout. I can see, the park. The Pittsburgh Park is the nicest park in baseball.
Beautiful. Oh, my!
Like
fantastic.
Petco, San Diego said, make a park like Pittsburgh.
Yep.
That's basically what happened.
Yep.
Amanda, thank you so much. Amanda Gotti, PNC Bank. This is in preparation for our road trip to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Lions, Steelers, whenever they play next in Pittsburgh, I think we could do that.
Surveillance helicopter out there.
Michael Barr would go. Amanda Gotti, thank you so much. A churn to the market. I haven't seen a Bloomberg launch pad this lethargic in ages, folks, and it's just waiting for that key CPI data that we see tomorrow, and then into the earnings season with Jamie Dimon on Friday. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Hospitals and other healthcare facilities on Florida's Gulf Coast still reeling from Hurricane Helene. They're now revving up for Hurricane Milton. The now Category 4 hurricane is projected to make landfall a bit south of the Tampa area late tonight. Meanwhile, more help is on the way from FEMA to Florida ahead of Milton. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell.
We are sending in additional resources to help supplement all of the stuff that Governor DeSantis has mobilized across the state. We have sent in additional search and rescue teams and assets to include airlift, high water vehicles.
FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell spoke to ABC. This morning, the Supreme Court will hear rare oral arguments in an unusual and dramatic death penalty appeal. Richard Goslip's been scheduled for execution in Oklahoma 8 times after being convicted in a 1997 murder for hire. He's been given 3 last meals. He was linked to the crime by only the testimony of the confessed killer, who later recanted. And unknown to jurors, was diagnosed as bipolar and taking psychiatric meds. Caroline Polisi is with Columbia Law School.
Oklahoma wants to move forward with implementing the death penalty against a man, even in the face of the prosecutors from the prosecutor's office that convicted him agreeing that they suppressed evidence.
Legal analyst Caroline Polisi spoke to CBS. This year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry goes to David Baker, Demis Hassabis, and John Jumper for their work with proteins. Finally, it's time to play Guess This Sound. Las Vegas said farewell to the historic Tropicana Hotel and Casino with the implosion this morning. The Trop was one of the Vegas Strip's oldest hotels, built in 1957. Storied hotel closed last year. Today's demolition makes room for a $1.5 billion stadium that will be the new home of the Oakland Athletics, who are scheduled to move to Las Vegas in 2028. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and John.
How many mobsters visited the Tropicana?
Oh, man, I had big fun at the Trop, drinking and some other stuff you don't need to know about.
Trouble back in
I had fun. I missed that
It's
place.
not the same now. I did a speech out at the Paris, the one with the balloon.
Yep.
And I remember walking, the Trop, and walking down, and it's, to me, as a complete amateur on Las Vegas, I defer to Katy Perry, is, the basic idea is, am I right, it's just been homogenized into a tourist destination.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's a much better business model now, having followed these stocks for 30, 40 years. It's a much better business model because they don't rely upon gaming, which can go up or down. It's all about all the money you're spending in the restaurants and the shows and the shops. And
could the four of them, could Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Joey Bishop, and Dean Martin, could they happen today? I don't think so.
I mean, it's like, there's no more dunes, there's no more hacienda.
There's the Sphere.
Yeah.
I mean, so everything.
The Sphere's rocking. I mean, it's fun to watch.
It's one of the most amazing things in the world.
Have you been?
No, but I want to go see the Eagles are coming back. So I want to go see the Eagles there. But that's a.
Okay. We all live vicariously through Paul.
Yeah. Bellagio. I've got my
no
suite
life.
to Bellagio
Tucker,
set.
no life. Keene, no life. Sweeney will be at the Sphere. From New York City, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stock futures trading right now modestly lower. This follows a rally led by technology shares yesterday. The NASDAQ finishing up 1.5%. Attention is going to be paid to the release later today in the session, the minutes from the last Federal Reserve meeting. That's when the central bank cut interest rates by 50 basis points. Alphabet shares, they're declining 0.4% with a breakup of Google among the remedies the Justice Department is now considering, and that's weighing on sentiment overall. Boeing down 1.5%. S&P Global Ratings placing the plane maker's credit rating on credit watch negative as the machinist strike enters a fourth week. Right now, the S&P futures down 7, Dow futures down 55, the NASDAQ futures down 44. A study by the nonprofit health researcher KFF finds companies' premiums for employees' family health insurance increased at more than double the rate of inflation to over $25,000 in 2024 as costs of care continue to rise. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thank you, John Tucker. There are moments I remember looking at what Matt Winkler invented, which is the headline service of the Bloomberg Professional Service. I told Matt once basically he invented Twitter before Twitter was Twitter. And the headlines come out, and they're in black and amber. And if it's an important headline deemed so by Otis Bilodeau, he's a keeper of the red, it's a red sticky.
Yep.
You know, they do something. Marty Schenker, you know, Marty and Otis, they're in charge of the red.
Whatever they want.
One day in 2002, a red sticker came out and landed with a whimper. And it was basically Department of Justice walks away from harassing Microsoft. Joining us now, Mandeep Singh on the latest Microsoft Google. I'm a complete cynic on this. I'm sure I'm unprofessional. Mandeep Singh, how many years out until there's a red sticky headline from Bloomberg saying DOJ walks away from going after Google?
I mean, this is going to carry on for a while. What we are seeing right now is the DOJ really suggesting a wide range of remedies, both behavior and structural, here in terms of how Google manages their ecosystem, whether it's default partnerships or the data sharing from their Android and Play Store. So there's a lot in there in terms of remedies. I don't know if everything will go through. They'll fight it off in the courts. But
so are you looking at 3 years? Are you looking at 5 years? Or are you looking further?
I think 2 to 3 years is probably a good timeline. And remember, there will be a change in administration or not. We don't know in November. So that could have a bearing in terms of how these things play out. But we're talking about a pretty long-term kind of timeline in terms of when the actual decisions would be made.
All right, Tom, I saw the Bloomberg News headline, just like you did, U.S. weighs Google breakup as remedy in historic antitrust case. I'm like, that's never going to happen. But let me just check. Go read Mandeep Singh's research on Bloomberg Intelligence. We see a breakup of Google's ad tech business as the most likely outcome for a remedy in the company's monopoly case with the U.S. Justice Department. So you think this is real? I can't just blow this off now? Well, is it material to the company?
When you look at all the different parts of the business that DOJ is objecting to, whether it's, you know, the Android and the Chrome browser and the fact that Google shares data across their different family of apps, this is the one where I think everyone realizes Google has an ad pricing advantage because it's a buy-side platform, it's a sell-side platform, it's an exchange. It pretty much owns the stack.
That's why we built it that way 20 years ago.
Well, and it was built on an acquisition they did, 15 years back, the DoubleClick acquisition. So that's where I think the case is the strongest. Could you divest that part of the business? Because clearly there are conflicts in terms of, the different participants in that ecosystem and how Google is positioned. So that's why we think if you break out, if there's a forced sale of Android or Play Store, it just can't run on its own. It's a shared infrastructure that Google has for everything, for their search, for their cloud, YouTube. It runs on one shared infrastructure. How do you take out, Android or Play or any of the businesses, YouTube? It's very hard to break it up.
I agree. I don't know how they do it. And I think if you go to the person on the street, they would say, what problem? I love Google.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Facebook. I love all these things. I love Microsoft. I mean, but what are the regulators really trying? I mean, it already is a monopoly, a duopoly, whatever you want to call it. I mean, but as you mentioned, I'm not sure how you could ever break these things up. I'm thinking about Apple. I'm thinking about all these things.
There are a lot of behavior remedies I think that Google will have to make. One is the default payments. Why are they paying Apple $20 billion a year to be the default? Now, companies could have partnerships, so it's not unheard of to have partnerships. But clearly, I think that one has come into focus. And just the ad stack. I mean, Google has a monopoly in digital advertising because of their ad stack. So I think that's where they'll have to make those remedies.
There's 43 lawyers in a room with Google management this morning. They don't do Zoom calls. They all fly in. Yep. And there's 3 of them that actually know what they're talking about. What are they telling Google management? Just extend and pretend? Just delay? I mean, what's the strategy?
I mean, right now, Google's focus is on Gemini, their large language model. That's the race they're fighting for with OpenAI and other large language models. And what they want to prevent is, remedies that will hurt Google from being able to develop Gemini. That's the one thing they are betting on for the future. So the last thing you want is the Gemini development to be affected in some way.
Update on Microsoft. They've gone silent. What's Microsoft doing right now into earnings?
I think Microsoft is quite happy about what's going on with Google, given
Huge
now
distraction, right?
Yeah, and plus now they have a chance to actually gain some share in search, which they've been trying.
Oh, come on.
Well, I mean that's
I told you we don't talk to anybody promoting Bing. Are you kidding me? Is this finally Bing's moment?
Bing powered by OpenAI and LLM. So that's the big difference. And look, if you're looking 5 years out, LLM-based searches will have an impact on the market.
Out behind our control room is a surveillance graveyard, and there's too many tombstones out there for people that said, this is Bing's moment. Come on! This is going to make Bing go finally?
I think the behavioral remedies could give it a shot in terms of gaining some share, like just changing of defaults on Android. So if there is a choice screen, then you can pick Bing now.
Tom, our tech analyst is playing injured here. He's got some kind of cast ace band
What
thing.
happened?
What the heck?
What
happened to
Anurag
you?
take a swing at
Yeah,
you?
Anurag take a swing at
No,
you.
it's a wrist injury I got while playing tennis. So, I was inspired by the Shanghai Open, Alcaraz, and the Sinners. And
our tech analyst
Amateur,
playing.
I love.
VJ
VJ was like elegant.
And his brother. I forget his brother's name.
Yeah,
But anyway.
but they were like really, like they changed the
I
sport.
ball boyed for VJ Armitage.
Did you
The South
really?
Orange Lawn Tennis Association in New Jersey back in
My
the day.
word, this is after you stopped by the Manson Stone Harbor.
Exactly.
With
exactly.
Taylor Swift. Okay.
Yep.
Mandeep, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Just brilliant.
This is
And
real for Google.
I think I've shown my cards here. I'm like, are you kidding me? But we'll see. You nailed it. I mean, Mandeep in his research.
Well,
note
I have to go back to
says it's
Mandeep on this
legit.
whole Gemini thing because when you pull up the Google like little icon thing to do your search, it shows this, Gemini thing. Am I supposed to use this Gemini?
I
thing?
don't know. I'm still getting used to all the new AI stuff. And
Yep.
I
All
think
right.
it gets worse. So I'm standing around at Bloomberg headquarters one day. It's great. You meet people you can't imagine. So there's a physics major from Pennsylvania who started a band called the Hooters.
Yeah.
And they were like a local band.
Philly. Awesome.
Philly. And they were like the real deal.
Yep.
And everything they touched was fabulous.
Great songwriters.
And so you have your moment, you move on and all that. Eric Bazilian moved on to a girl playing the folk circuit in New York, and they did an album. And everybody this is like one of the songs that everyone knows. And Bazilian wrote this, what if God was one of us, da-da-da. Joan Osborne. And the whole album is it's still to this day absolutely spectacular.
Yep.
I saw Joan on a video the other day. She's killing it. She's doing great. But this is for Joan Osborne. It's really for Eric Bazilian, my fave, Ladder. Good morning.
You're giving me crooked answers.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. She's on assignment. John Tucker in today to give us perspective, wisdom, and other items. The article you did from Todd Gillespie on Wall Street salaries was, they're downish.
Yeah. No, I got out my really small violin for that one.
Yeah. I mean, what are the averages? 471?
Yeah, that's including bonus.
Oh, that includes Bonai.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
I see.
That's pretty bad, actually.
Thank you for that update. Todd Gillespie writing that up. Look for that on a Bloomberg Professional Service. Program note yesterday, CFA level 1 back to pre-pandemic levels, 44%.
Yep.
Pretty good.
That's a tough test.
Got
to put the time in.
There's three tests.
Yep.
Level 1, level 2, level 3. Gina Martin Adams took level 4. Pass. She was the only one that passed that.
Problem.
It was buy, hold, sell, 101. We say good morning to all of you. We're on YouTube on a commute across the nation as well. Rob Carolyn, seriously, will come up here in 10-ish minutes with his really smart update on this terrible hurricane. What we heard, Paul, from Rob earlier, it's coming quicker than what we expected a day ago.
Yeah, and
you lived it. You were in Orlando.
Alex Steele and I, we flew out yesterday, 3 p.m. I'll tell you what, the airport did a great job yesterday. The airlines did a great job yesterday getting people out.
Right.
There was no
Orlando's shut down now.
They're shut down
ago.
10 a.m. Yeah, exactly. So people battening down the hatches. But they knew what they're doing down there with hurricanes. It just feels like they've done this before.
Turn to the market. Oil under 77 on Brent crude, 76.59. Oil really quiescent. West Texas, $73 as well. With our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, major stock averages modestly lower, weighing on sentiment. Google parent Alphabet, the Justice Department, of course, considering asking a federal judge to force Google to sell off parts of the business. We saw another plunge in Chinese markets over concerns about smaller than expected stimulus out of Beijing. The CSI 300 index giving up 7.1%. Right now, the Dow futures down 18, S&P E-mini futures down 2, the NASDAQ futures 20 points lower right now. Chewy shares, they're up close to 2%. TD Cowen started coverage on the online retailer Pet Products with a buy rating and a price target of $38. And earnings season starting. That's underway. The big banks on Friday, JP Morgan Chase among them, and the focus for investors, net interest income. And advice from PIMCO. They say investors who expect central banks in industrialized nations to successfully tap the brakes on growth while skirting downturns will do well to target 5-year bonds. As we look to the Treasuries, 2-year yields right now unchanged, 3.96. The 10-year yield is up 2 basis points, 4.03%. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
And John Tucker, thanks so much. Gina Martin Adams, Bloomberg Intelligence on your earnings season. What do pros do as earnings season begins? What do you look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends upon what role you're in. But what we look at when we're as strategists is how the consensus expectations are changing and whether or not that is an accurate deviation from current macro trends, whether it is driven by certain sectors, if it's driven by revenue or margin growth expectations for the quarter, and how it's impacting the longer-term outlook.
Right.
And a couple of things really stood out for us coming into the third quarter. We're starting to put our work on this out just now, but the first is the consensus is getting more cautious, just as the economic data has proven that the economy is stronger than many had anticipated for the third quarter. And I think that dichotomy is quite interesting. A lot of the consensus downward adjustment to expectations has come from energy. But just for a sense of how much things have changed,
right.
3 months ago, analysts were expecting nearly double-digit growth for this quarter. They're now expecting 4% growth. Energy was expected to post about a 4 to 5% decline in earnings. It's now expected to post a greater than 20% decline in earnings in the third quarter. So a lot of this is just coming from the lack of upward momentum in commodity prices really weighing on the energy sector. But nonetheless, analysts are getting more cautious. Now, this is a really interesting quarter because while analysts are getting more cautious, company guidance has actually gotten more optimistic. Company guidance would imply we're going to get something like 15% earnings growth, while analysts are anticipating just 4%. So there's this incredible spread of just incredible sort of bearishness on the part of the analysts.
So, Paul, you live this. What a parlor game. Did you ever get a call from somebody, hey, Paul, let's update?
Yes. Well, here's the thing. Well, back in the day, we used to talk to management about what they were going to report in 2 days' times, but that was back in the day.
Before Reg FT.
Yeah. Yeah,
2 days before, they'd be making adjustments to the adjustment.
We're going to crush it. And so I'd go out with a call the next day. XYZ is going to crush it. Boom. There you go. That's how you did it back in the day. All right. Here's a headline that I could never get past the Bloomberg Intelligence editors. Even the wallflowers are grooving to bull market's global beat. You're talking about it's not just the AI and the big cap trade. What's going on out there in the global market?
Yeah. So this was our global valuations update as of earlier this week. We updated our thoughts on sort of what's happening with duration and how our market's pricing duration amid the shift in monetary policy. And then also just good old valuations. What's happening with PE ratios across the world? And the interesting thing that emerged in the third quarter, quite in contrast to the first half of this year, when the only valuation expansion in world equity was happening in mega cap stocks and specifically AI-related stocks. In the third quarter, we saw a very big broadening of valuation expansion. So even the cheapest stocks in the world that supposedly no one wanted to own, I call those the wallflowers at the dance of the bull market, they suddenly got out on the dance floor. We started to see valuations expand for the cheapest stocks. We saw this in particular with China's surge and China's rally at the end of the third quarter. But it was more than just China. We did see a broadening of valuation expansion. So again, while analysts are getting more pessimistic about the earnings outlook or more cautious about the earnings outlook, we're seeing a very different trend emerge in stock prices, more optimism embedded in stock prices. Valuations are expanding even for the cheapest stocks that supposedly no one wants to own. So there's a sentiment shift underway, potentially perpetuated by monetary policy change, that the analyst community is not yet jumping on board with.
You know, the BI analyst community, they're going to be on the conference call, folks. Gina's going to be walking down the row, checking them out. What they're really doing is listening to the Mets baseball game instead of the conference call. Do conference calls have any value anymore?
I think they have a tremendous amount of value, actually. We actually go through company transcripts and look at transcripts as well as management commentary.
We call that Rich Yamarone 101.
Yeah, we look at even analyst questions for changes in tone, and we've gotten some really good cues for the broad market trends from this transcript sentiment analysis that we do. For instance, if we go back to the fourth quarter of 2022, that was the quarter in which stock prices finally made their big lows after that nasty bear market of 2022. That also happens to be the quarter when sentiment shifted. So company sentiment was telling us to be a little bit more optimistic coming into 2023. We also saw, for instance, AI sentiment really peaked earlier this year, and we've yet to see that expand again.
Is that peaked, do you think?
At least from our transcript work, the sentiment toward it has peaked. Yeah, it doesn't mean that growth has necessarily peaked, but sentiment toward the theme certainly peaked already.
To be clear, Allison Williams, the giant, when she's on the call with JP Morgan, she's not going to go to Jeremy Barnum. Hey, Jeremy, great quarter. Thanks for taking my question. We don't do that.
As far as I know, we do
we
not.
Don't do
However,
great,
I don't have that degree
where did that
of
come
visibility.
from, Paul?
Oh, well,
great quarter.
Guys like me, they're looking for the next investment banking ticket, probably. Let's be honest. It worked, by the way. All right, so is tech still the leader of this market? Do I need tech to be leader, or can somebody else lead this market for the next 10%
Well,
higher?
it's been a really interesting last couple of months because really since June, tech has only led in fits and starts. It's not been the clear leader in the equity market. We've seen a lot of rotation, in particular rotation into more defensive sectors and interest rate sensitive sectors emerge over the third quarter of this year. The U.S. at large the big tech-heavy U.S. stocks are no longer the leader in global stocks either.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, you started to see China really pop prior to this last couple of trading days, certainly, which has damaged that trade somewhat.
Right.
But there has been a lot of churn beneath the surface of the bull market.
30 seconds, you've lived it. A hurricane coming aboard in your Florida. What's it really like when you're living down there?
Oh, awful. Awful, terrifying. The traffic alone over the last couple of days, just, I can't imagine what these people are going through, especially because a hurricane just hit a week ago. So it just so happens that I was down in Florida last weekend, and these are people that are just starting to recover and clean up from the last one, which we talk a lot about North Carolina as being the most damaged and the flooding there just being devastating, but Florida also suffered in the last hurricane, and now we're going to have a double whammy.
Gina Martin Adams, University of Florida, thank you so much with Wisdom on Earnings Season. Right to it with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, John, Hurricane Milton is heading towards Florida's Gulf Coast. Officials there are warning that time is running out for preparations and evacuations. The storm, now a Category 4 with 155-mile-an-hour winds, is expected to make landfall tonight and bring a potentially catastrophic 15 feet of storm surge to some areas. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell says they have resources staged to help with the recovery.
We're moving in commodities, food, and water to be able to get into areas. We're bringing in power assessment teams so they can quickly help assess what areas and what critical infrastructure might need power restored fast.
And we'll have more with Bloomberg's Rob Carolyn on Milton in a few moments. President Biden is set to hold his first call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in about 2 months as Israel considers its response to Iran's missile attack. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons has more from Washington.
There was scheduled to be a meeting today at the Pentagon with the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and his counterpart in Israel, Yoav Gallant. That meeting was suddenly pulled, we understand, because Netanyahu told Gallant he wanted to speak to Biden before Gallant went into these talks with the U.S. and wanted him to be present for a vote of the Israel Security Council on what their response to Iran will ultimately be. Now, we do know that conversation between Netanyahu and Biden is going to happen today.
Bloomberg's Kelly Lyons in Washington. Finally, the FBI says it arrested an Afghan man who was plotting a terror attack in the U.S. on Election Day, planning to kill Americans on behalf of ISIS. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Joining us now, Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg meteorologist. The airport is shut down, Rob Carolyn, in Orlando. What's next?
Well, we await landfall. People who live in western Florida, west central Florida, need to be out of their locations if they're going to evacuate by about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Otherwise, it's just not going to make sense. One of the things that's happened, Tom, is the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, has put much of central and south Florida under a tornado watch through 9 p.m. this evening. Lots of times, landfalling hurricanes do produce tornadoes, and we're concerned about that possibility. We're watching the first of several feeder bands now work their way towards the Fort Myers and Naples area. There is some very heavy rain falling right now across north central and northern Florida as that tropical air mass out ahead of the storm is pushed northward. The good news is the eye has disappeared, so that's a sign that the central pressures come up a little bit. I think we're starting to see a little bit of a weakening trend. We expected that to happen before Milton makes landfall, but it is still going to be a very potent hurricane when it's striking the coast, I think just south of Tampa around midnight tonight, Tom.
Rob, I hesitate to ask here, but Michael Barr is just reporting 15 feet of storm surge. Where does that go?
Inland. That's where it goes, Paul. So what happens is, since the central pressure is so low, the ocean rises up into that void, and as the eye passes the coast, you get this bubble of water that's going to be 10 to 15 feet high with waves on top of it crossing the coast. Now, my best estimate is it looks like the models are trending a little further south, so this may be not the worst-case scenario for Tampa, but it looks like a really bad-case scenario for Bradenton, Anna Maria Island, Port Charlotte, all the way down towards Fort Myers. That's where we could be talking about storm surges in excess of 10 feet with this system as it goes inland.
Rob, to a pro like you, does this signal a new style of hurricane season, or do you look at this as a one-off 2024?
Well, what it's signifying, Tom, is a change in the pattern. So Northwestern Florida, the Big Bend area, Tampa. This is not an area that's been hit by hurricanes on a regular basis. This is the closest Tampa's coming since 1921. So it's been a long time, but the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a number of storms striking from the Big Bend area down into the western coast of Florida, which has been a little bit unusual, but it's because some of these storms have been later in the season and over the Gulf of Mexico, so they start getting affected by the jet and they move off towards the north and east rather than moving towards the west, towards Texas or Mexico.
Rob Carolyn, thank you so much. Bloomberg meteorologist on the seriousness of Milton.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with the Futures Report being brought to you by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group Futures across equity, indexes, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. Stock futures right now, they've turned mixed. S&P 500 actually approaching the 2-year anniversary of its current bull market run that comes on Saturday. Justice Department, the big news here, considering asking a federal judge to force Google to sell off parts of its business. This is an effort to end Google's online search monopoly. And shares of Google parent Alphabet, they're down about 0.5% pre-market. Tesla enjoying its best ever quarter for China shipments. Vehicles delivered from its Shanghai factory, the company says, rose for a third consecutive month. Generac Holdings running low on portable backup generators after Helene and other recent storms. The company stock hitting a 52-week high Monday as investors bet the company is going to see a big boost in sales for the backup power systems. And then some news just breaking from Honda Motor. They're recalling 1.7 million of its popular CR-V and HR-V SUVs and Civic and Acura Integra sedans. That's because they're at risk of steering trouble while in motion. Dow futures up 8. S&P futures right now 2 points higher. And the NASDAQ futures, they're down 3 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. It is a pedigree of extinction. He was at Oxford and INSEAD and did some amazing work at Morgan Stanley. I'll get to it in a moment. Readable essays on the chaos of continental banking, and then went on to work with the British government and, of course, service to the Bank of England as well. With Oliver Wyman in our studios this morning, their vice chair, Huw van Steenis, joins us. Huw, Paul's going to get to the private credit essay where we are. We had Jim Zelter in from Apollo Global Management the other day. I got to go back to your wheelhouse where it was like we'd read these 15-page reports and go, damn, I got to read this whole thing. Is it finally with UniCredit and Armati and Commerce Bank that we're finally what you were writing about 20 years ago?
Well, thanks for having me on. Look, my goodness, I wish Andrea the best of luck on this because I think we need cross-border.
But culture still matters.
Culture still matters, but let's be clear. Lufthansa took over the Italian airline. Why can't it happen in reverse? And also, UniCredit owns a German bank already. So actually, it really is an in-market German deal. There's 2 German banks going to potentially merge with each other. So I think I was at an investor conference 2 weeks ago. I'd say my read is that the market thinks there's like a 70 to 90% chance it'll happen, but they might need to give a pawn or two.
Come on, what's the government thing? David Harrow of Chicago went down in flames on this. Finally, they're going to get their act together, and the continental Europe is going to act more like American and Anglo-Saxon banking. Baloney. Do you see a change in the German government or in the Italian government?
It's slow. Look, we are seeing. So actually, but below the radar, we are actually seeing some bank M&A. There's actually 3 live bank deals in the UK at the moment. So they're small, but they're happening. Spain's got one on the boil too as well. So there's bits and pieces happening. But let's be honest, it's not US style, and we haven't. And like as Jim Zelton would say, we don't have the capital markets either with the breadth and depth that we need.
But you certainly can have that. I mean, right before the Great Financial Crisis, Tom, the argument was: is London more important than New York? And that was a valid argument to be had.
Totally.
And then Brexit happened, and you guys screwed it all up. But is the horse out of the barn for European banking. They will never catch up to Bank of America, to JP Morgan.
So it's interesting. At the moment, if you look at the top 20 market caps of banks globally, there's only 2 Europeans.
Yeah.
One's
Interesting. I didn't know that.
HSBC, which is effectively Asian, so it's not even European. So it's only one, and that's UBS, and that's number 20. And so,
no kidding.
Absolutely. And so I think UBS, with my old boss Column and Sergio, actually do have a chance to be in the Global Super League. Everyone else is in a kind of a European league or even a division below. And I think that's the challenge. And I think,
don't the European Union and the UK, don't they recognize that as a structural flaw that's going to hinder that part of the world for generations?
Well, look, absolutely. So, someone well, Mario Draghi just put out a report. Now, it was probably a little bit more than 15 pages, Tom. I mean, he had 150 recs. I mean, even one, two.
Oh, come on, you wrote it for
No, not this time. But actually, his finance piece made a lot of sense, which is we need securitization markets to reopen. We need deeper capital markets. And we need some of the larger banks to merge because scale matters in banking. You see that here. You're talking about JP Morgan on Friday with Jeremy's earnings. Scale really matters, and we have too few banks with that scale.
All right, your latest work is a topic that Tom and I talk about a lot because we're fascinated by the growth of this private credit. Early in my career, I was at the Chase Manhattan Bank. We were making leverage loans like crazy, making money hand over fist. I would never give up that business to private credit. But that's what's happened, hasn't it?
No, look, it's really fascinating how much banking has changed, and I think it's because the rules, whether they're Fed rules or Basel rules, are encouraging banks to limit the amount of risky loans they can take. Either they're hard capped or soft capped, or it's just the amount of capital. So the way I think we talked about this last time, the way I think about it is that banking is being retranched. The riskiest pieces are being laid off to private credit or to others, and the banks are left with slightly the lower risk pieces. Now, from a point of view of banking stability, that's not the end of the world, but it means they're less profitable. They need more scale. And actually, one interesting thing which I don't think has come out clear is, there are banks who play to win and the banks who play not to lose. The largest 5 or 6 banks say, actually, if I've got private credit, I can write even more loans and lay more off. But that's not how most people think. So
we are seeing deals with banks and private credit. What is going on there? Explain how those.
Yes, so look, let's be clear. This is a real thing, and obviously the Citigroup was the biggest group so far with Apollo. Right. But we've seen 14 tie-ups in the last 12 months versus only 2 in the year before. So it is a real thing. Barclays with Blackstone is another big one. Now, what's happening is, the big private credit firms need to originate assets because they're hungry for more assets. Mm-hmm. And they can't originate them all themselves, so they're working with the banks.
They need more deals.
You're going to see more deals like Citigroup.
There's plenty more in the works.
Okay, but the simplistic thing for mere mortals listening, and good morning worldwide, particularly in Huw van Steenis' United Kingdom, the heart of the matter is good people like Jim Zeltner, Mark Rohn, and others are out trotting out, this is painless, even though we have illiquidity, there's no big deal. You know the drill. Do you buy it? Or do you have a skepticism that we see out there from others?
So I think for the leading firms let's be clear in credit, and Paul knows about this. You can make a good deal or a bad deal, and you can lose all your money or take a big haircut. So you need to be very thoughtful when you're letting out your sheet. There are smart people, and Tom, as we both know, there's some less smart people. So within the private credit, of course, there'll be some deals which go bad. But in this kind of thing, insurance companies, which are about half the assets funding private credit, need yield. And so I think the really interesting sub-theme here is that as private credit gets more insurance assets, they lower their cost of capital and they become more relevant for investment-grade assets in the marketplace. And I think that's the trend which Apollo does brilliantly, Blackstone's doing very well. And I think that is a thing. And obviously, if it's investment grade, well, that is less risky, isn't it, Tom? So, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there'll be a fringe of bad practices, but I think on the whole, actually, this is more investment grade than not.
Have you ever worked with Pierpont, layering into the TV show industry? I mean, Huw sounds right out of industry, doesn't he? Are you watching industry? How real is it?
I'm not. I should be.
Oh, stop it.
I'm a failure on that. No, I haven't.
You're not watching industry?
No, Billions I love, but I haven't watched industry.
You got to see. Industry is like, I'm looking at it with Mrs. Keene. I'm going, my God, that guy talks just like you.
It's actually pretty good.
Huw van Steenis, thank you so much. Rare to see him. He's in studio today, of course, from the United Kingdom, working with Dan Tannenbaum and Oliver Wyman as well. Important comments there on private credit. We got to get the market open. I think, Paul, maybe it's a little different today than tomorrow.
Yep.
1 hour after the CPI report tomorrow.
We'll see how that
Maybe
goes.
we'll adapt and adjust. You know, we didn't talk to him about Premier League football. I mean, you know, Carney likes his Everton team, who are really like struggling. I mean, you know, I guess the season's just starting. It's young. Did you see what the Tots?
Did not see that.
The New York Jets coach went. Do you think the Tots coach could go?
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
I don't know.
Son has a tantrum.
The Jets coach go, so who knows?
We'll have to see on that. Red and green on the screen, a little lift of the tape here. The VIX 21.50. Okay, in honor of Huw, we'll do it. 130.76 pounds sterling. Huw remembers when it was 4. It was, you know, a few weeks ago. We say good morning on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, our new technology on YouTube in the United Kingdom. You can get to lunch and beyond with us on YouTube, Bloomberg Podcasts, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay as well. And of course, on Bloomberg 99.1 FM in Washington, our flagship, Bloomberg 1130 in New York, and in Boston, 92.9 FM. Thank you so much for that attention. The big story for me today, oil with a print for $81 for a cup of Sanka, back on down 76.02, down $1 on oil, down $4 from the tension earlier in the week. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg News, with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures trading right now just modestly lower, in fact, unchanged, following a rally led by technology shares yesterday. The NASDAQ ended yesterday's session up 1.5%. And there you have it, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And right out of the gate, the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 22 points. S&P 500 down right now less than a point. And the NASDAQ 100, that looks like it's about to trade lower, down just about 1 point. Antitrust enforcers weighing an historic breakup to mitigate Google's dominance in search. Shares of the Google parent Alphabet, they are down right now in the early going. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is the opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. It is apparent and is, I think, fairly predictable here on October 9th. As things get physical in politics, the mortal combat of Wisconsin is maybe front and center today. Really can't say enough about it. Over at Cook Political Report, Jessica Taylor and the team take Wisconsin Senate from lean Democrat to toss-up. Joining us now, Chief Combat Political Reporter for Bloomberg, Kaylee Lyons, host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. What do Trump and Harris have to do, Kaylee, to become more combative like this bloodbath we're seeing in Wisconsin? I mean, what do they do to get tougher in the final 20 days here?
Well, in part, Tom, they're going to spend more time there. We saw Harris in Wisconsin just last week in the birthplace of the Republican Party rip-on Wisconsin with Liz Cheney, the former Republican congresswoman and daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, at her side. So that obviously is evidence of how competitive Wisconsin is as she tries to bring those kind of forces there. And we've seen the tickets spending time there as well. But you're right to point to that down ballot race, Tom. The incumbent Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin is in a really tight contest with her challenger, and that's going to be one to watch as we consider what the balance of the Senate ultimately looks like.
Have you ever had a Miller High Life, Kaylee Lyons? Do you even know what that is? The champagne.
Of course I have, Tom.
Okay.
Not my favorite. I prefer just like a Bud Light, but
is any candidate, in this case Vice President Harris, is she scoring points in all of Wisconsin by quaffing a Miller High Life with Mr. Colbert?
That's a good question, Tom. I mean, obviously, the media appearances we've seen her do over the course of this week thus far are an attempt to reach out to wider audiences, including those voters who may not yet be in her camp, be them young women or men that might listen to Howard Stern, people who watch The View, that kind of thing. But bringing beer onto the scene here in the Late Show appearance last night, maybe just trying to humanize the vice president in some way. I'm not sure I really have a direct answer for it. All I know is I'm not allowed to drink a beer live on air like we saw them do.
Don't speak for Joe Matthew. He's popping Narragansetts, on the commercial break.
Kaylee, geopolitics, particularly out of the Middle East, continues to be front page news here. How is it impacting either of these candidates or these campaigns, if at all?
There's two ways, and both of these really are impacts on Harris, as she has, at this point, what is a disadvantage of incumbency. Not only could potentially the war in the Middle East and the way this administration has been supporting Israel through it blow back on her with more progressive voters and Muslim and Arab American voters in states like Michigan, where, if you remember back during the primary campaign, Joe Biden had more than 100,000 voters in Michigan choose not to vote for him, but instead to vote for uncommitted. And that movement still is there, the protest over the ongoing war in Gaza. That could be something in a state like Michigan where the margins are going to be incredibly tight that could ultimately decide if she takes home that blue wall state. The other thing to consider here is the impact on energy prices. Obviously, we have seen oil futures spike over the course of the last week and change as we've seen this escalating tension in the Middle East. There's a big question about Israel's response to Iran's attack last week, whether they could go after energy infrastructure or potentially even nuclear sites, and what Iran could do in response, like, say, choke off the Strait of Hormuz. All of that could lead to higher oil prices, which then could translate into higher prices at the pump, which is one of the most visible signs of higher costs to the American voter as they get ready to cast a ballot on November 5th.
3.5 weeks left to go to the election. Kaylee, what role, if any, do you believe President Biden will play in this campaign?
He is playing a role. We've seen him visiting a number of swing states just in recent weeks. He was in Wisconsin yesterday, then Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, of course, somewhere we're seeing Donald Trump spend time today. So he is going to be out there campaigning in part for Kamala Harris and in part trying to cement his legacy as we're in his final few months in office here. But as we discussed earlier on the show, guys, while you're seeing President Biden, former President Obama, former President Clinton, even Jimmy Carter expressing support for Kamala Harris, you don't necessarily have that power of former presidents doing the same for Donald Trump on his side.
And now for the parents that have spent $1 zillion on tuition, the question that matters. Kaylee, you majored in politics at UVA. What of your studies at UVA have you brought over to this campaign? I'm asking for Mr. and Mrs. Lyons.
Oh, my parents are going to be so thrilled that you asked me this, Tom. I think part of what I studied in school was inequality and polarization, and how the dynamics, especially what we saw in 2016 of voters who used to be solidly Democrat, are now solidly part of Trump's base, which kind of speaks to this populist shift we have seen from 2016 to now, and how this populist undertone is frankly present on all sides of this race, on both tickets, and the way in which the working class and the middle class have been so prominent in this election cycle. Certainly something to consider here. Also, the other major I had, in addition to politics, was media studies, the way we consume what we are getting. And in an election cycle that is so rife with mis and disinformation, it's really important to consider what is the objective truth here.
So you come down 95 and you hit, north of UVA, and you go over to Route 81 and you go down the border of Kentucky, and it's Trump country. I mean, I don't think there's enough people talking now. We said, like, what are the last 48 hours for Harris? What have the last week been like for President Trump?
Well, in terms of the hurricane response, what you might be alluding to as we consider western parts of the southeast here?
It's general week.
Yeah.
I mean, the strategy into October.
Well, we're seeing him hit the swing states. He's going to be in Pennsylvania today. We have J.D. Vance, for example, heading to Arizona alongside the vice presidential nominee on the Democratic side, Tim Walz, because it's important to keep in mind, Tom, that while we're looking forward to Election Day, election season is already upon us. There is voting happening in a number of states, including battlegrounds like North Carolina, voting that could be disrupted because of the devastation of Hurricane Helene. And starting today, early in-person voting begins in Arizona, another one of these critical battlegrounds, which is why you're seeing candidates focus there today. So that's really what it's about at this stage of the game. All the policy positions, frankly, are out there. It's now about driving turnout and trying to get people jazzed to head to the polls.
And Paul, this is Gura's favorite state. I mean, Kaylee doesn't care. Gura's all over Scottsdale.
Of course I care.
Exactly. Hey, Kaylee, if former President Trump were to lose, is there any feeling within Washington, D.C., how this Republican Party is going to look a year from now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now?
I think it's anyone's guess, as we've seen kind of the Republican Party split into different factions as a result of the Donald Trump movement. You certainly see that in the House of Representatives. There are some that people would classify as rhinos, Republican in name only, versus those who are more loyal to Donald Trump. You're seeing it on the ground in some of these states. There is actually a friction in some of these turnout operations. The ground game in states like Michigan is there are divisions between the more MAGA wing of the Republican Party versus the more institutional wing. So it's going to be interesting to see if Donald Trump is out of the game, how the party puts itself back together and in what form it takes. If you're still going to have figureheads like J.D. Vance, who are more in Trump's image, that are going to be the leaders of the future potentially.
Mrs. Keene just emailed in Kaylee. Ask Kaylee if you're working the weekend after the election. Kaylee, am I working the weekend after the election?
It's probably a safe bet, Tom. It'll take a long time in all likelihood to figure out who decisively won. And of course, there's litigation that could follow for weeks and months after that.
Between me and Mrs. Keene, thank you. Nice to know that, Kaylee. Kaylee Lyons, thank you so much. Balance of power. Of course, look forward to 12 noon today. I mean, she's working at this like an animal. I know. She's just all over the research of it and what's going on. Like she says, down ballot.
Yeah,
I mean, that's really a key phrase we're hearing.
Bloomberg News has a small army down there in Washington, D.C. bureau, so they're all over this. We've got some really smart people down there.
Greg Giroux for attendance yesterday with Bloomberg
street by street across this country.
Red and green on the screen. We're open for trading. The Dow up a fractional 33 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, John. Hurricane Milton is turning in the Gulf of Mexico as Florida's west coast braces for the storm expected to make landfall tonight. The storm is expected to bring up to 15 feet of storm surge in some areas. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor telling residents time is running out to evacuate to safer ground.
If you're in a single-story house and we get a 15-foot surge, which means that water comes in immediately, there's nowhere to go. That home that you're in ultimately will be a coffin.
Milton is now a Category 4 storm with 155-mile-an-hour winds. We're learning more about Bob Woodward's new book, War, is set to be released next week. According to the book, Donald Trump, while president, sent American-made coronavirus tests in 2020 to Russian President Vladimir Putin during a crippling shortage in the U.S. Meanwhile, Trump is denying he's spoken several times to Putin since leaving the White House, as reported in the book. ABC's Jonathan Karl spoke to the former president by phone.
He said was that you've had a number of conversations with Putin. Is that true? I mean, I imagine that could be. No?
That's false.
Oh, really?
That's false.
So you haven't spoken to him since you left the White House?
No, I have not.
Woodward also says President Biden had profanity-laced outbursts about Putin and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in private. Biden called Netanyahu a bad guy back in the spring as Israel ramped up its deadly attacks on Gaza. It comes as President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu are set to speak today amid increasing efforts by Washington to temper Israel's response to Iran's missile attack last week. The FBI has arrested an Afghanistan man who lived in Oklahoma on suspicion of planning an Election Day terror attack in the U.S. Federal prosecutors say an FBI search of the suspect's phone revealed ISIS propaganda, including images depicting a suicide vest and the 9/11 attacks. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I want to do a shout out here. We spend so much time with an East Coast bias.
Yep.
Paul, I'm as guilty of this as anyone, and thank God you parted the waves of the Research Triangle years ago, and maybe there's Stanford. When I was like 20, I did some work with the University of Washington.
Okay.
Never came to any research. It was on sudden infant death syndrome. But with this Nobel Prize in Chemistry today, which is a really interesting melding of protein theory and AI, 3 guys, and the lead here, David Baker, is out of the University of Washington. And I can't say enough of their commitment to biochemistry and basic biology of the human system for 40, 50, 60 years. They don't get nearly enough cred. We leaned on them here at Surveillance during COVID.
Yeah, we did.
Where they had some real COVID experts. But I just can't say enough about the equivalency of the University of Washington with any other institution worldwide in chemistry. And it's a big day for them.
Okay. Yeah, it's absolutely. Nobel Prize. Yeah, absolutely.
So, shout out to,
good shout out.
And they're in Tacoma. They 52,000 people. Yeah. They all go to the football game.
I don't know what conference they're in now. I couldn't tell you.
That's
I don't
true.
know. Are they Big Ten now? Who knows?
I mean, it's a mess. I mean,
It is a
college
mess.
football. I mean, thank God you're back because I had to talk Texas A&M.
Yeah, I know.
With Jessica Menton.
Yeah, she's an expert there.
And it was they're up to 15 in the country.
Yeah.
If they, they could be, January.
Penn State number 4, Rich. Just pointing it out there for you, buddy.
Are they really?
Yeah. Might be a tad overrated, but. Yep, exactly.
Real Penn State is number 4.
Yeah, well, everybody lost. Like Alabama lost, and
that's true. Yeah, we covered that. I didn't cover Penn State.
We're focused on Harvard. We're focused on Harvard football.
Harvard football tomorrow. Good conversation there as they dive into the Ivy League schedule. That'll be on a Friday. We'll be looking for that. I see. Dow up 107 points. The VIX 21.28. A quiescent tape from New York City on YouTube on Apple CarPlay. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Right now, the stock averages, they are mixed to lower. Traders awaiting minutes for the latest Federal Reserve policy meeting, and also some key inflation data for clues on the bank's next steps. Consumer Price Index out tomorrow. And then earnings for the big banks, that starts Friday. The focus for investors is going to be the net interest income. Right now, you have 7 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500, and consumer staples, that is in the lead right now. Shares of Alphabet, the parent of Google, down about 0.5%. News the U.S. weighing a Google breakup in an historic big tech antitrust case. And the crisis involving Boeing taking a dramatic turn. Negotiations to resolve the almost month-long strike with the machinists collapsing. Also, S&P Global Ratings warning it may cut the plane maker's credit rating to junk. And shares of Boeing right now down 2.4%. Overall, S&P 500 up 2 points. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 144 points. And the NASDAQ Composite Index 30 points lower. 2-year yield 3.98. That's down. That's up just about 3 basis points. The 10-year yield 3 basis points higher, right now at 4.04%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that this morning. Which skyscraper went belly up this week?
I don't know. I'm just waiting to see something on 3rd Avenue trade. I want to see if it's a 40% discount, a 50%.
Yeah.
I want to see when that thing trades.
We're colored by this. I had a view of Midtown Manhattan sort of out a window years ago, and I sat with some guy who was smarter than me, and he said that one went under, this one went under, and all the different stories. We're going to get an update now, not on Midtown Manhattan, but on the nation. She's with Morgan Stanley with just sterling experience in real estate, the myths, the certitudes we all spout that are wrong. Lauren Hochfelder, she got 6,000 square feet on the Upper East Side for next to nothing. She's so good at it. She joins us now with Morgan Stanley. What's the biggest myth that drives you nuts right now about commercial real estate?
That all commercial real estate is crappy commodity office. It is real estate there is certainly commodity office that is down 70%, but not all real estate is that.
So give me an example of a skyscraper that's making it happen right now.
You know what people don't realize? It's so interesting. I think people have realized, there's the best and the rest, but here's what they don't realize. It's not just that the best of the best office is inoculated from these headwinds. It's actually benefiting from it because you've seen this massive consolidation of demand into so few buildings, right? The definition of good is the narrowest I've seen in 25 years. And so these office assets are almost becoming an oasis in the desert, right? New York, we've actually had a pretty healthy return to office more recently, but take a market like San Francisco that is still sub 50% utilization, almost 40% vacant. But notwithstanding that, in our office buildings there, we're seeing all-time high rents. So you're seeing the best of the best continue to really thrive.
I mean, Morgan Stanley, we were talking about off air, Morgan Stanley Real Estate has been the leader on Wall Street for as long as I've been on Wall Street. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because you guys were first. Where do you guys see opportunities now? Because I know you always see opportunities. Where do you see them now?
Thank you for that. Look, I think part of why our platform has been so successful over time is it's really global, right? So we have 17 offices in 12 countries. Real estate's really local.
Yep.
And so these days we've been most active in the US and Japan. But we're also finding some really interesting special situations in Europe. There's a lot more, leverage locking up the system there. And so we're finding opportunities to buy, hotels in Paris at really wide yields. We're finding opportunities to trade assets in Tokyo. And in the US, where we have really strong mega trends driving demand and supply just falling off a cliff, that's yielding really attractive opportunities as well.
We got the Fed cutting interest rates. How does that change your outlook for what you guys might be looking at?
Yeah. Look, interest rates coming in is obviously really good for, frankly, all types of real estate. It creates, among other things, price stability. But we try not to get too distracted by the noise, sort of 25 basis points here or there. Ultimately, when we come out of this, we don't think interest rates are going to restabilize at pre-COVID levels, which means that you need to be in the types of real estate that you're not betting just on cap rate compression, you're betting on income growth. So you have to be in those sectors where there's real growth.
Is it just a few cities, or can you spread it out more to other cities around the country? Is it opportunistic in Nashville right now?
Look, I think we focus on where people are moving, but let me be clear. I think sometimes developers develop to the rearview mirror, and when they see people moving to Nashville, they keep building in Nashville.
Yeah,
right? For example,
like multifamily is ugly right now.
Multifamily has certain pockets of massive
Yeah.
oversupply. That's
okay.
for sure.
I want to go to the tech space. This is the Puck Building downtown. I don't know if you were involved in this transaction with Kushner and Company, but basically OpenAI came in and made everybody happy for everybody had cocktails at One Vanderbilt at Prelude because, oh my God, we actually rented a big building. Is that a harbinger report for what big tech is going to do nationwide?
Look, I think you're seeing big tech return to the office and take more space. So you're seeing, a bunch of the FANG companies really take space. But ultimately, I think a lot of the talk around AI is, are they leasing office space? Are they in data centers? What I think people often overlook is there are other ways to capitalize on AI in real estate. So for example, industrial, right? AI, we think, will be a real boost to e-commerce penetration. That's going to drive demand for industrial. I mean, even in our residential assets, we're using AI to make better assets.
If you guys go out to raise capital to say, hey, we think it's a good time to buy real estate, are people going to give you their money?
Look, I think there's a lot of data to support that. We've been saying it for a while, but now you're seeing it. I mean, you were all just discussing the stock market. Equities are up, 55, 60% over the last couple of years. Private real estate values are down 25%. You tell me that feels interesting.
It's interesting. So if a marquee property in San Francisco, again, one of my favorite towns, were to come up, is there a price point where you guys would be like, all right, now you got my attention? Or do you say, the fundamentals just aren't there, there's really no price I want to get long real estate in downtown San Francisco?
No, there are absolutely assets where you feel really good about the long-term tailwinds. And again, it's where demand wants to be, and it is super narrow. The aperture of what tenants want is really tight. And that is even further concentrated because of ESG and sustainability.
How does private equity and private credit affect Morgan Stanley's path forward? You're sitting having a cup of coffee with Mr. Pick, and you've got to go, okay, we got to merge up and mate with somebody like Apollo mated with Citigroup or whatever. Is that the future here, where you guys are doing happy dance with private credit and private equity?
Well, I think Morgan Stanley's been investing in private equity, private credit, private real estate for a really long time, and we're really proud to have premier franchises across all of them. So as to what we do from here, we'll see, but we have premier franchises in each of those areas already.
That sounds like a sales brochure. She's a killer.
She knows what she's
I mean,
doing.
that was, her attorney's going, yes, nailed that.
Well,
Paul, save us with one more.
One more here. Where's the best opportunity today? You get fresh capital today, where are you going?
Yeah, we are really investing behind the global supply chain realignment.
Okay.
So industrial in those spaces.
And is that a U.S.-centric thing, or is that a global phenomenon?
Oh, it's global. It's global. So it certainly affects major U.S. markets. But even, you look at the diversification of manufacturing from China to India. We have a lot of industrial in India that's doing well.
30 seconds. You're sitting with Vice President Harris or President Trump, and they go, how do we fix the housing market in this cratered America? Lauren, how do you fix the housing market in America?
Supply.
Got to bring it on.
Yeah.
That's simple.
You need supply.
Like East German skyscrapers all piled up. Nobody wants that. Not in my backyard, right?
Well, what's interesting, though, is the type of supply matters. And you got to look at where the demand is. And I'd say that in this country, you have millennials and boomers. And guess what? Millennials need more space. Boomers need more services, healthcare, services.
Okay, Lauren,
she was pointing at me when she said millennials. But
yeah, she was.
John, you need some services? What kind of services does John need?
Lauren Ackfeld of Morgan Stanley, thank you for the update. I'm with Paul on 3rd Avenue, being suspect. We'll have to see how that works out. For Louis Tiant, Boston Music, the Cars.